Hello and welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Development Council of the Town of Oakville. Madam Clerk, do we have any regrets from councilors?
We have regrets from Councillor Sandu.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Council, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest to be declared this evening? Councillor Knoll?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to declare a pecuniary interest on the matter with respect to 6.2, which is the Kerr Street OPA proposal, a public hearing. I am the shareholder and director of two corporations which lease the entirety of the property at 171 Spears Road, which is mentioned and impacted by this proposal.
Alrighty. You will, of course, file the requisite form for the clerks. And I'll just note that council is not making a decision on this matter tonight. We're only receiving comments from the public and members of council, and you will excuse yourself from commenting, I guess. So thanks very much for that. Madam Clerk, I see no other declarations. Council, a mover and seconder to resolve in the committee of the whole would be in order. Councilor Lischina, Councilor Grant, thank you very much. Is there an objection? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, the motion carries, and we're now resolved into committee of the whole. And I would ask council now to keep in mind the memo dated February 9th distributed to you in regard to item 4.2, which is one of the two consent items. And all that does is add the standard school board conditions to that document. And I'd like to invite you, someone, to give me a motion to approve not only the consent items, but also number 9, the advisory committee minutes and measures therein. Councillor Knoll, thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, the consent items and the advisory committee minutes are adopted. We have no confidential consent items, and we have 2 public hearing items. As we will say several times through these 2 items, these 2 files are being heard tonight for the purpose of rounding out the issues list that staff will be referring to as they consider what recommendation they will bring back to council at a later time. And the public is welcome to call in and participate or add issues to the list that we will be compiling from the public and members of council. And that number, as you'll hear more than once tonight, is 905-815-6095. And so if you're watching the live stream of the meeting and you wish to join the meeting for the purpose of adding your comments, all you have to do is phone that number, and the clerks will courteously help you participate, and you'll be called upon to speak in proper order, one by one. And we have registered delegations, so if you're phoning in, you'll appear after them on our first item, which is the public meeting report for 70 Old Mill Road. And this is an official plan and zoning bylaw amendment. And we have a presentation from our senior planner on this file, Trish Collingwood. And we're going to give our attention now to her. Council, of course, has already read this material, but the public ought to have the benefit of a presentation summarizing the reports that we've all read. And I don't mean to suggest that the delegations tonight haven't read it all, but at any rate, this will help other people follow along. Ms. Collingwood, would you please begin?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Good evening. Thank you. The purpose of this report tonight is to present the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for that was submitted, by the owner of 70 Old Mill Road in conjunction with the required statutory public meeting. The applicant's proposing a 12-story building on the last remaining block along Old Mill Road with 154 residential units. If you'd like to speak to this item tonight, as Mayor Burton mentioned, you may call in at the number on the bottom of each slide that will come up, 905-815-6095. As noted by my report, there are no decisions to be made at this time, and the staff reports to be received by council tonight. Next slide, please. The subject lands are located within the Midtown Oakville growth area, a designated urban growth center for the province. The property is located on the south side of the Oakville via GO Station line, which is the hub of this major transit station area. The site has direct access to the GO Station, and the subject property is the last of the four buildings. So there's 40, 50, and 60 Old Mill. This one is addressed 70 Old Mill. The entire property for the 4 blocks is 1.75 hectares, and 70 Old Mill Road has a lot area of approximately 0.158 hectares. The surrounding uses are to the north of the Lakeshore West Line and the CNR. To the east is Old Mill Road and the Oakville GO parking garage. To the south is Cornwall Road, and to the west is 40, 50, 60 Old Mill Road, or Old Mill, the residential towers. Next slide, please. This is a slide of the urban structure for the town of Oakville. It's included in the Livable Oakville plan and provides the basic structural elements of nodes and corridors where high intensity forms of growth are to be accommodated. I've noted on the slide here where the approximate where the lands are within the urban structure, and the site is within a regional transit node and a provincial priority transit corridor. The regional transit nodes are located at locations to integrate with the townwide transportation system and to provide a focus for transit supportive development. Next slide, please. The site's designated high density residential on a schedule L1 in the Midtown Oakville land use plan of the Livable Oakville plan. Policies within Part D in the Livable Oakville plan permit this type of residential built form and state that the residential high designations have a density range of up to 185 units per site hectare. The applicant has submitted an amendment to the official plan to increase that density limit beyond 185 units per site hectare, upwards to 264 units per site hectare. Next slide, please. The building heights permitted on this site are identified on the schedule of Livable Oakville and are between 6 and 12 stories. Next slide, please. The subject lands are zoned residential high with a special provision 191 as noted here on the zoning slide. The applicant has applied to amend the zoning bylaw to permit an increase in height that's identified in special 191 from 36 meters to 36 meters to 45 meters. And in this case, typically a 9-story building to a 12-story building. They're looking to remove the existing 29 unit cap on the site and allow for a maximum of 154 residential units. In addition, the applicant is proposing some modifications to the existing zoning that would better suit the footprint of the proposal that they've put forward tonight. And this includes looking at yard setbacks, parking ratios, the height provision, as I mentioned, and some minimum and maximum flexibility with setbacks and stepbacks. Next slide, please. So this is an overall site plan for all 4 blocks at Old Mill. The Old Mill properties, including the site, have a development history that was included in the staff report, so I don't want to go through it again, but it dates back to 1994 when the lands were rezoned for residential apartment buildings, and also included multiple family dwellings, as well as a health club and local commercial uses. So that was back in 1994 when that came in. There was multiple rezonings throughout the last few years, and I will note in 2015, a site plan application was brought forward from the owner currently bringing forward tonight's applications, where he was looking for a 9-story building with 29 residential units complied with the zoning. And during the beginning of the pandemic, construction on the underground works of the site were stalled. And the applicant decided to revisit the application at that time prior to receiving full site plan approval. So at this time, that application has been withdrawn, and the newer application that we're seeing tonight is before us. Next slide. So this is just for the site plan for the proposal tonight, as well as you can see the underground loop of the parking garage for the adjacent 60 Old Mill. Old Mill Road is the north-south road here on this slide. The building's proposed to accommodate 154 residential units with 166 parking spaces, and this is inclusive of visitor parking. Fully in an underground parking garage. The development also includes 67 parking spaces. Vehicular access is off of Old Mill Road. And the overall site plan includes 70% one-bedroom units and 30% two-bedroom units of the total. Next slide, please. So I've included a couple of conceptual elevations. These do not include the site context at this time with the other Old Mill buildings in the rear. During the OPA and rezoning process, we are not regulating or approving the specifics of the elevations, but setting the footprint of the building and evaluating whether or not the development can be accommodated by the road and servicing infrastructure, as well as what the impacts and opportunities for this type of development are. So we're not looking too detailed into the specifics of the elevations, but I just wanted to include some of the concepts that the applicant has provided to date. Next slide, please. So I will say, as typical in our Oakville rezoning processes, that we do undertake a urban design review of the concepts that are coming in, just to provide feedback to the applicants to try and assist in future site plan applications. We do take a look at that. So the Livable by Design manual, it provides a comprehensive and detailed design direction for development, and the urban design team has been weighing in on the concepts and will be providing appendices to the recommendation report, should the recommendation be for approval, that would include requirements of the site plan. Next slide, please. So matters to be considered in this application include alignment with the climate emergency declared by Council in June of 2019, conformity and consistency compliance with the provincial and regional policies, support of Metrolinx's regional transit plan for 2041 future rail improvements, contributing to the region's healthy communities objectives, conformity with livable Oakville policies, Midtown Oakville intensification objectives, livable by design guideline parts A and C, whether or not the concepts and the densities are architecturally appropriate and designed to complement the adjacent buildings along Old Mill. Contemplating the shared use facilities agreement between condos and understanding the updates required for that. Looking at the contribution to the transit supportive environment along and in and around along Cornwall and Old Mill Road. Justification for the proposed OPA to increase the density limits. Justification for the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to increase the height and the number of units, and the assessment of the transportation impacts, travel demand management measures, and appropriate parking standards. Next slide, please. As part of the process that we're in right now, the applicant was required to hold a virtual public information meeting, and that meeting was held on September 9th of 2021. The number of attendees was not recorded. However, 9 members of the public actively participated in the meeting that the owner of the property hosted. Over the next few months, the town and agency comments will be provided to the applicant review. So we're still reviewing the studies that were submitted. We'll be having technical discussions and possible resubmissions by the applicant. And at the end of that process, staff will provide a recommendation report that speaks to the resolution of the matters to be considered, public comment that is raised through the process as well as tonight, and council raised issues at this meeting. For future processes, if the application is approved with site-specific provisions and urban design requirements, the next steps will include removal of a holding condition. The region is still assessing whether there's a need to have servicing holds placed on the bylaw if a bylaw were to be approved, a future site plan application, and reviewing that application with regards to urban design requirements as put forward at future recommendation meeting. Next slide, please. In conclusion, staff put forward the following recommendations as shown on this slide for council's consideration, and that concludes my presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Collingwood. Madam Clerk, it's my intention that we call the delegations next, and then council will wrap up. That way, if there's an issue missing from the issues list, the residents get first crack at adding it, and council plays backup. I think that's fair. Now, to the delegations. You get to use your time any way you want, and you can, and I've read your written submissions, and so I'm offering you some free advice. You can argue against the project. You can use your time to do that, but this is not the decision meeting. This is the identify the issues meeting. And so your best use of time, before you spend your time arguing, is to have regard for the list of issues that staff have identified and tell us if there are any issues that need to be on there that aren't on there. And then segue to any arguments you care to make. But, you know, you should remember them because it'll be time for your arguments at the recommendation meeting some months hence. So, Madam Clerk, would you, well, first, can we have up on the screen the issues list for the delegations to see while they're delegating, on the off chance that that'd be helpful? And there. And now, Madam Clerk, would you call the first delegation?
The first delegation speaking to this item is Penny Hedrick from the Joshua Creek Residents Association.
Welcome, Ms. Hedrick. Council looks forward to the issues you may add and anything else you have to say. Please unmute yourself and feel at home and start your information.
I'm so sorry. Are you able to hear me?
Loud
Okay,
and
great.
clear. We hear you very well.
Sorry about that. So thank you very much for allowing us the opportunity to speak to you a little bit about Joshua Creek's thoughts about the issues of 70 Old Mill. We've been following the Midtown file for many years now because obviously developments in this area will have a profound impact on the day-to-day life of our community and that of many others across the town. So we've recently reviewed the proposed changes to the 70 Old Mill property developments with interest and some concern. JCRA has been liaising with our neighboring RAs and recognizes and supports the need for intensification, but we have a few questions related to current proposals for this site. So obviously what we've been talking about tonight. Residents have not received an update from town staff with respect to the Midtown plan since last July, which is over 6 months ago. The public information sessions and the council workshops that we attended this past spring presented pedestrian-friendly designs with the emphasis on wide sidewalks, setbacks, and green spaces. So I have a short quote from the town-initiated official plan amendment saying the draft OPA recognizes the importance of the public realm, sidewalks, parks, open spaces, streets, etc. Urban design policies are proposed to ensure that the public realm incorporates a year-round walkable network of pedestrian-oriented urban parks, squares, and streetscapes. When we look at the November 2021 site plans and last week's public meeting report for 70 Old Mill, they do not appear compatible with the vision that's been shared above. So the initial plans for this site called for 29 residential units, while the new plan proposes 154 units, creating obviously a substantial expansion from the permitted density of 185 units per site hectare to up to 264. And I just wanted to note as well, although this isn't in the letter that we submitted yesterday, I understand that this may be actually a low number because the 264 units might be averaged across all 4 buildings. So 70 Old Mill is actually quite a bit higher in terms of its density. We understand that some developments may be entitled to bonusing when additional units are permitted if any of the following are included within the development. 1, the land required for future roads. 2, above ground parking levels. And 3, office space included with the development. This development does not meet any of these criteria. JCRA has also flagged concerns with respect to the traffic and parking issues that such a huge increase in the number of units would create. Parking for residents, visitors, contractors, and deliveries seem challenging as the proposed new building density appears to us to be oversized for this lot. Furthermore, we are disappointed that we do not see the setbacks, wide sidewalks, and parkland that were articulated in the urban design visions of the Midtown presentations, nor do we see a commitment to a holistic vision of Midtown via connected active transportation routes or planned contiguous green spaces. These are all necessary elements that we believe will contribute to the overall livability of the Midtown community. JCRA respectfully requests that the town carefully consider whether this proposed development is truly complementary to existing and planned Midtown developments. We believe the parking and traffic congestion are problematic with the site as it is proposed, and we are concerned that the newly proposed density dramatically exceeds the original plans and maximum density for Midtown without providing compensating benefits as outlined under the bonusing provisions. While it is not discussed in the public meeting report, we further note that the plan as stated is exclusively residential, and we request that town staff give consideration to a mixed use model that balances the residential and commercial needs to ensure livability in this community as originally envisioned. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide feedback on development in Midtown. We encourage you to ensure that all Midtown developments align with your overall vision of a complete community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hedrick. Any questions, council? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation?
The next delegation is Sandra Montgomery.
Welcome, Ms. Montgomery. Council looks forward to your information. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Good evening, Mayor Burgeon and members of council. My name is Sandra Montgomery, and I am on the board of directors of the Halton Condominium Corporation 397, which is 60 Old Mill Road. I have been on as a member of the board. I'm also a member of the Shared Facilities Committee that encompasses the 3 corporations on Oak Ridge Heights. And since January of 2021, I have been a member of the working group that has been working monthly and more recently weekly with the developer of the project that's before you as information this evening. I'm here tonight to say that as the board of 60 Old Mill Road, which is the closest currently existing building in the Oak Ridge Heights community to Lot 70, I'm here to communicate to you tonight that the proposed project in principle and our support in principle after many, many meetings and many discussions amongst the working group that have identified matters to us in Oak Ridge Heights and the opportunity to work with the developer to work through those matters that have been identified and have come to agreement verbally on the matters since January 2021. Those matters have been communicated with all owners in Oak Ridge Heights. They are currently in a verbal format, a verbal agreement with the developer, and we're in the next steps of making sure that everything that we've agreed to verbally is now being translated into binding written agreements. And we right now have draft agreements that we are reviewing and will be sharing with our respective legal counsel for condominium, an expert in condominium law. I would like to tell members of council and you, Mayor Burton, that our meetings with the developer have been positive, collaborative, and I believe will continue to be as we proceed towards finalizing the things that verbally have been agreed to that we feel will be of benefit to all members of the Oak Ridge Heights community. I would also like you to know that I have been involved as a member of the board of 60 Old Mill Road on this Lot 70 file since the year 2013. So it's been before us as a board, as the boards of the other two corporations for quite a long time. And we certainly would like to see something accomplished. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Montgomery, for your information. I don't see any questions. Madam Clerk, would you, I see questions now. Councillor Giddings. You'll just have to unmute yourself. There you
People
go.
usually tell me the opposite. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the delegation. Ms. Montgomery, thanks for coming out this evening. Question regarding the support in principle of this project. I understand the shared facilities agreement is something internal to the 3 or now possibly 4 condo boards. Your feelings on the height, the density, the parking, all the items before us this evening, you are in support of?
I think from the point of view of, through you, Mr. Mayor, the point that we're trying to make is that we have been, since 2013, I guess, I think we agree as a board that there are changes coming to Midtown. We realize that there's the provincial and regional and municipal mandates for densification are coming to our neighborhood. They probably weren't there when we first started dealing with a proposed project in 2013. I will tell you that our certainly our board and our owners are pushing for an all residential building. We've had conversations about mixed use. I heard that in the previous thing. So in terms of, we have heard from our owners about height and about density. I think in terms of the things that we have come to an agreement with the developer on are things that are important to us as change is coming.
All right, so thank you for that. So if I may, you're fine with some of the other concerns that have been expressed in the correspondence received in terms of the look or the amount of parking or egress, ingress from the building on Old Mill Road. That's all good with you and or your board?
I think from the point of view of it's trying to weigh the balances, if you will, all residential, no construction materials on our property during any of the construction, our legal fees being paid as the project is developing new shared facilities and construction and crane agreements. There are many things. I mean, it's balancing. It's I believe give and take at this point. But so, and as I said, until we actually have binding agreements that indicate all of the things that have been on the table and have been discussed for in depth over the past year, until that's all complete, our support will be in principle.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Ms. Montgomery. Just a couple of questions with respect to your working group and your boards. Was there a process of representing the entire membership with respect to the units and so forth? Were they part of the process, and was there a voting or any support to support the board in representing your views with respect to this development?
If I could just ask through you, Mr. Mayor, clarification as to a vote being taken? Is that what you're asking?
Well, was there any process of acknowledging to all the members or units members with respect to the position of the board? Is the board representing the entire three buildings? That's all.
I'm only speaking on behalf of the board of Building 60.
Okay.
Right, and in terms of the owners of the corporation, the condominium corporation elect the board to act on their behalf. We have in Oak Ridge Heights a shared facilities committee that is bound by a shared facilities agreement. So each corporation has 2 members on that shared facilities committee. And so the communication is from shared facilities back to the board. And certainly through our newsletters and through a very detailed communication that was sent to all owners in November, outlining the discussions to date and where we were in terms of working with the developer. It was quite detailed. For 60 Old Mill Road, we sent that communication out prior to our AGM. So owners had an opportunity at our annual general meeting to ask questions. We had a condominium lawyer expert as part of our AGM meeting. So she was able to clarify for owners that had specific questions or to be more specific, questions that were dealing with density and traffic in that. And she was able to clarify the position that the board takes with working with a developer. And certainly her recommendation to us and owners at that AGM were privy to her advice as to how the board should continue to work with the developer to try and get, if you want, the best possible outcome.
Thank you, Ms. Montgomery. That answers my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, councillors. Madam Clerk, would you, thank you, Ms. Montgomery. And Madam Clerk, would you call the next delegation, please?
Next delegation is Jane Huddleston from the Trafalgar Chartwell Residents Association.
Welcome, Ms. Huddleston. Council looks forward to your information. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Is she in, Jeff?
All right, perhaps we have a little technical issue with the clerks here. Could we take down the slide momentarily so that the meeting clerk can see what she needs to see on her screen? And let me ask, Ms. Huddleston, are you there?
She should be there.
We think you're there.
She has to unmute herself and put her camera on.
So if you'd like to unmute yourself, there, I start to hear you.
Muted now.
So
Okay.
if you turn on your camera and get closer to your microphone, it'll be much better for the counselors to be able to hear you.
Okay, I think I should be unmuted now.
You're good, I'd say. So
Okay.
please begin.
Okay, thank you. In the interest of full disclosure, I am a condo board member at one of the existing buildings on Old Mill Road. I live on Old Mill Road, and I am also on the board of the TCRA. I am speaking here strictly on behalf of the TCRA tonight. However, I have also made a written submission as a resident of Old Mill Road. At the TCRA, we have watched with great interest the public presentations that town staff has made over the last year about the vision for Midtown. We support intensification in this area if it conforms to that vision. However, we feel that the proposal for 70 Old Mill Road disregards almost every positive attribute of the Midtown vision that was presented. 70 Old Mill is probably the smallest parcel of land that will be developed in Midtown, yet the developer himself at his own public meeting, called the proposed building a superstructure. The building and the density is oversized for the lot, for the road it will be on, and with its proximity to the established residential neighborhood. So we cannot support this development due to traffic issues, inappropriate structure and density for the lot, the objectionable precedent it sets, and the impact on a stable established residential neighborhood. The vision of Midtown that was presented by town staff was one of vibrant streets with wide sidewalks, buildings with setbacks, lots of green space, safe public spaces, open spaces, and compatibility with the existing community. The proposed building at 70 Old Mill is in complete defiance of all these features. There is no space for setbacks, as the entire lot will be consumed with the building. The traffic situation on Old Mill Road, as I will outline, does not constitute a safe public space. It simply does not match the vision for Midtown that we were shown at the two public presentations. Many of the traffic problems that we have put forth at other Midtown meetings also apply to 166 cars added in this location, such as the inability of the surrounding intersections and the major arterial roads to handle the volume. But I'm going to focus on a more micro, very local traffic problem, since I experience it firsthand as an Old Mill resident. If one good thing has come out of the pandemic, it is that residents of Old Mill can drive north towards their home safely in the late afternoon. GO train traffic has been absent during the pandemic. However, we have to assume that it will someday return to its pre-pandemic levels. When Metrolinx built their indoor garage, they made a mistake in making the indoor kiss and ride exit only to Old Mill Road. It could and should have exited through the new intersection that Metrolinx created on Cornwall. Cars that use that kiss and ride and the South Metrolinx surface parking come flying onto Old Mill Road at high speed as if the road is nothing more than an extension of Metrolinx property. Several years ago, representatives of each of the three existing buildings on Old Mill met with senior Metrolinx management who came out from Toronto specifically for the meeting. We walked them around the area, showing them the problems and suggesting solutions. They saw no problem and flatly refused when asked to even install a more visible stop sign on their property. The proposed 70 Old Mill Road will add 166 more cars, plus taxis, service trucks, etc., to this already dangerous and chaotic situation on this short and narrow road. In addition, the size of the units in the proposed building is likely to attract renters. We are in favor of rental housing being available in Midtown, but renters tend to live in condos for a shorter period of time than owners, therefore increasing the frequency of moves and adding more truck traffic on a road that is ill-equipped to handle the current and certainly the increased car traffic that will result. There is also a problem with Metrolinx customers using the apron of the driveway that currently belongs to 40, 50, and 60 Old Mill as an unofficial kiss and ride. Cars picking up also stop at the top of Old Mill Road, where the town has a tiny, worn, and rusted no stopping sign. In spite of our best efforts with Metrolinx and the town, these traffic issues have existed for many years and will only be made worse. We have also been told that Midtown would be pedestrian and cycle friendly. The dangers that I have described for cars only present more danger to pedestrians or cyclists during peak commuter traffic periods. There is simply no room on this lot for a building with the proposed number of units and cars, and it is impossible to accommodate the pedestrian-friendly, wide sidewalk and livability of the nature described in the vision for Midtown. The developer's traffic study purports to know how many cars will enter and exit the site at various times of day, yet not a single unit has been sold, so nothing is known about the demographic that will occupy it. We have concerns about the traffic based on the existing situation there, and those concerns are greatly enhanced by adding 166 more cars. Then there is the construction phase. All of the traffic and safety problems I have cited will commence as described once the proposed building is occupied. The more immediate concern is the presence of construction vehicles. Building a structure of this size does not happen quickly. Cornwall Road, as well as Old Mill Road, are likely to have one lane blocked for the duration of construction. And what if GO train traffic returns during or before that time? I recently saw Midtown discussed on Oakville Matters, where it was said that we can accommodate this kind of growth without, and I am quoting, wrecking our stable established neighborhood street. Oak Ridge Heights, consisting of 40, 50, and 60 Old Mill Road, is the only stable established neighborhood street already existing in Midtown, and it has been for 22 years. It has many of the features you aspire to create in Midtown. It has its own streetscape, its design is consistent with the surrounding neighborhood, and it has open spaces. Putting 70 Old Mill Road, as currently proposed, at the base of their driveway as their gateway will not be consistent with the stable, established residential neighborhood or the town's vision of Midtown. The people who live there know that something will be built there. The currently proposed building will add almost as many units as 2 of the 3 existing buildings combined onto the smallest piece of land. This concept is ridiculous. Not only the increased volume of cars, but the placement of the enter-exit ramp to the proposed building's 6-story underground garage will make safe access and egress to and from any of the buildings on the site impossible. Sorry, I'm just trying to turn a page here. We at the TCRA would very much prefer that all new developments in Midtown adhere to the vision of that the town has created for Midtown, which we fully support. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Huddleston. Council, are there questions? I see none. So, Madam Clerk, would you please call the next delegation?
Our last listed delegation is a phone-in from Robert Cruikshank.
Welcome, Mr. Cruikshank. Council looks forward to your information. Please unmute yourself and begin.
Right. Hello?
Hello, we hear you very well. Thank you.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I have questions, actually just 3, based on timing estimates. And I wondered, the first one is, what is the anticipated date for resuming construction on the site? Number 2, what is the anticipated completion of construction date? And thirdly, the anticipated residential occupancy date. I know you can't be specific, but just a ballpark would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions.
You're welcome.
I will ask Ms. Collingwood if she has any information on that. I will tell you that typically we do not know that kind of information at this point. But Ms. Collingwood is here, and she's ready to give you her view on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Burton, that is correct. We would not have that information at this time. That is something that, closer to the finalization of a site plan agreement or approval that we can look at when potentially underground permits are going to be pulled again, below grade permits, but at this time we do not have those answers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cruikshank, for your questions.
Thank you, Mayor.
We regret that we don't have the crystal ball we need for that. All right.
Just the ballpark would have helped, but that's all right.
Yes, I understand. All right, Council, it's your turn. Councillor Haslett-Deal, do you have any issues to add to the staff's list?
I think I have some that I may just need to be worded or considered a little bit differently. So my first is just around the question that came up from one of the delegations, and it's around the increase in density. So in fact, the OMB actually made a ruling, I guess, several years ago, and they reflected 307 units across 4 sites is what was planned. And right now the applicant's proposal would take it to 460. So if we could get clarification, what benefits the community will receive for agreeing to this level of density, that would be appreciated. I know tonight that Tricia mentioned that the mix of units will be 70% 1 bedroom and 30% 2 bedroom, which is better than the initial discussions that we had heard. But for clarity, is the applicant held to that mix? And is there any option to increase the variety?
Through you, Mayor Burton. Just on the apartment mix, typically we do not hold the applicant to that mix of units because it is at the early stages before site plan drawings are prepared, and so that's not something we typically do. It doesn't mean it isn't something that we can take a look at through the rezoning process and discussions with regards to the requirements that are included as part of the appendices with the recommendation report. And I just had a complete mind blank on your first question. Sorry, I got it. The community benefits. So back to that, community benefits is something we're still looking at. So the applicant isn't required to bonus on this site because they meet the height requirements. So they're not asking for anything additional with height requirements. So there's no bonusing being applied for right now. With regards to the community benefit charge, as you know, that's what will replace bonusing. Then we will be looking at that in the fall. So under that review of this application, it is something that we can take back through your list of issues. Something that we can take back and look to what, and the timing of the approval of this application, what that kind of community benefit could look at if it's still applicable at that time.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just going to go back to mix of unit. Can you give us any understanding of the size of the units that are proposed?
Yes. 1 second. If I remember. Hold on. Through you, Mr. Mayor, 1 second. Do have this up here somewhere. There is a mix of units. It looks like some 1 bedrooms can be looking at a minimum of 500 square feet upwards to 700 square feet. And 2 bedrooms, we're looking at some 1,200 and 1,200 square feet mix.
Okay, thank you for that. I know that the owner and the applicant are listening, and it's just given what we've just gone through as a community and around the world, we know a lot more about work from home and the impact. And so having I hope you would take into consideration that initially he had 29 units. Now he's proposing 154. Maybe there's something that's more of a compromise that speaks to what's changing in our world. I just wanted to make sure that when we talk about urban design, because you raised it twice. So when you talk about compliance with designing Midtown and livable design guidelines, I just want to emphasize that there is this, that we seem to have this struggle with what is complementary and in terms of style and materials abutting those properties. And while for some that may seem minor in nature, it in fact is a significant part of our community they're living in. So I would encourage that there be more conversation about, is this current design really complementary to, as one delegate put, the established neighborhood. I had a question about Metrolinx and the parking lot that's beside. So it's my understanding that Metrolinx has property in which they can develop beside the parking garage. Can you just confirm for us what they could potentially build there and at what height?
Through you, Mayor Burton, currently they have a height limit of 6 to 10 stories, and they can look at, sorry, 1 second. They can look at some mixed use development in that block.
So, so across the road from Old Mill, is it 2 more buildings that could go in, or 1?
I'm not sure if I've ever seen a concept with more than 1 building. I know there was a concept with another parking garage at one time, so I'm not sure if I've seen anything that would accommodate 2 buildings, but it is 6 to 10 stories, mixed use.
Okay, so I would just ask that as you're considering this application, all the conversation about Old Mill Road and the ability to get in and out, you know, I trust that there's going to be some analysis and critique of that traffic study, but there is the potential of development to the east of this property, which has the same road network, unless something changes. And so I think that needs to be a factor that is considered in the application. And then my only other question is just around the, I think how to phrase this, in terms of the parking ratio, are they being held to a parking standard, and or have we agreed to be flexible on the parking standard?
Through you, Mayor Burton, we have not, at this time, we've not agreed to anything outright. They've not been told that they're held to a parking standard, as we are still evaluating in reviewing the context and their parking justification study. So they're not far off when we look at their counts, their parking counts, and the ratios they're using for the size of units that are coming in. They are insignificantly off from what our standard is in the for mixed use and residential areas. So for growth areas. So there, it's feasible that the parking rate that they're suggesting is reasonable to incorporate into the bylaw, and that is still being reviewed.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Giddings, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just busily scratching off the questions that I had here. Ms. Collingwood, one of the points that you identified as an issue under review was the shared use facilities agreement between the condo boards need to be updated to reflect the increase in density. Could you tell us our part in the shared facilities agreement? Do we identify items that need to be considered by the 4 partners, if you will? I'm just wondering how far we go entering into those waters.
Mayor Burton, the town has no party to that agreement in any way. The discussions that we are interested in is it looking at the inclusion of the waste storage area, which was identified as needed during the site plan process in the last 5 years, as well as visitor parking spaces. So are those needs being addressed through an update of the shared facilities agreement? That's important as we go forward with the site plan agreement. So we would want to understand if that's being addressed. Other than that, we have no party to it.
Thank you. Would we look at would they look at their parking standard for their buildings and assume that it would be the same for 70? Or are we at a point now where there is no closer group of buildings to mass transit and municipal transit than this location? The expectation is it would require or justify a lower amount of parking?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I think in the last 20 years, definitely parking has evolved and the expectation of parking has evolved, even with regards to visitor parking. That would be something we would take into consideration when we review the parking rate that will be applied to this building versus the other parking rates. We have unblended parking options and more travel demand management than we did, when we reviewed the applications 20 years ago for the other 3 sites. So we wouldn't be matching, but we would take into consideration current context.
Great, thank you. Under the traffic study that was done, the original traffic study was performed in 2013, and they did an update count, I believe, in the fall of last year. And the projection is for a 1% growth per annum. The 1% I can't quibble with, but we do know there's going to be a spike when the buildings in Midtown get added on. I'm just curious whether that is something that can be updated or factored in with the current and, more importantly, the future levels of traffic that's anticipated.
Through you, Mayor Burton. Excellent question that we are taking a good look at as we understand some of the development pressures that, for example, district are looking at on the north side of Cross, and through the policy work that is being done for June to bring forward some of the Midtown work, I would believe that we would be taking a better look at what some of those growth rates would be in the Midtown area, and if they're rising more than 1%. In other parts of town, we've always looked at a 2%. So, but in growth area around a major transit station, 1% might be reasonable, and that's something that we would need to assess before we come back to council.
All right, 2 other quick questions. One is the underground parking. I believe they're looking at 6 levels underground. I can't recall a building that we have with 6 stories on the side of, I guess it's a geotechnical question in terms of stable top of bank. What are they digging? What's the substrate they're digging down through? And just curious in terms of, we obviously have a report coming back on that. Will it need to be peer reviewed, or it's an awfully big gamble if there are any difficulties with it?
Through you, Mayor Burton. So a geotech study was done by the applicant. However, it wasn't submitted because it wasn't required as part of the pre-consultation meeting. It wasn't part of the checklist. However, they did do one with full knowledge that they would likely be asked for it. And of course, it would be required with the site plan. So as part of my comments going forward and requirements for a second submission, we will be asking to have that geotech submitted for review. I can't speak to peer review at this time because we haven't seen it yet.
All right, so next question, or last question, in terms of servicing, so our new Ward 3 residents can brush and flush, where are we with servicing for that area?
Remember, and this is something that ongoing conversations with the region have started with looking at the policy work that's required to get Midtown going. Understanding that the region they've updated their area servicing plan as of January of 2021 to look at the development pressures, and the master plan for the whole of the region to look at water, wastewater is about to begin. That will take probably a year or 2 to complete. And so holds at this time will have to go, will likely be placed on several of the Midtown developments as they come forward, because the region will not have ascertained what that level of servicing and the projects, the capacity, as well as the sewer, I think it's the sewer trunk lines that need to be updated in the area, where those will be forecasted to be completed. So that work hasn't been done yet, and over the next couple of years will be determined through the region.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. I see no other questions, so I'm going to turn to our planning director to tell us if any of these thoughts that we've just heard have translated into an additional issue on the issue list. Mr. Charles.
Thank you, and through you. The additional items that I caught was to provide some clarity to council on the density calculation over the entirety of the site. Consider options to increase the mix of unit sizes and types. And in reviewing the transportation study, consider the future development potential of the adjacent Metrolinx parking lot, as well as better understand what our future growth rates may be and how that may affect the overall road network.
Thank you. Council, have you heard anything, or did you not hear anything you expected to hear? Is that list complete? If it's complete, would someone be pleased to move the recommendation? Councillor Hazlet-Thiel, thank you for that. The recommendation is as supplemented by the list recited by the director. Any objection to the motion? Madam Clerk, there being no objection, it's carried, and thank you very much, everybody. Let's turn our attention to the next public hearing item, which is the public meeting report on an official plan amendment application by April Investments and Trans County Development Corporation and Oakville Developments. And this concerns 560 to 584, 550 and 530 Kerr Street, and 131 and 171 Spears Road. 131 Spears Road being the property identified by Councillor Knoll to explain why. No, maybe I have that wrong. Anyway, this is the one that Councillor Knoll has declared a conflict on and is sitting out.
Yeah, 171, Your Worship.
Thank you.
171 Spears.
171, 131. I should have heard that. Thank you. All right, so we have registered delegations from we have one registered delegation, and we have a representative for the developer on hand for any questions. And anyone who's watching this can phone in to participate and as I say, add issues to the list of what staff will be evaluating, the list of concerns and issues that staff will be evaluating the application against. That being the purpose of this meeting, this is not a decision-making meeting. This is make sure we've got all the issues meeting. So the number to call if you want to participate on that level is 905-815-6095. 905-815-6095. The clerks are standing by to smoothly incorporate you into this meeting. So now, Council, let's give our attention to Paul Barrett, our senior planner, who will explain this for the public and refresh our memories from the files we've read. Mr. Barrett, you have the floor and the Zoom and whatever else you need.
Thank you, Your Worship. This presentation will summarize the staff report, which introduces this planning application in conjunction with a statutory public meeting. No recommendations are being made at this time. Following this meeting and once the review is complete, staff will bring forward a recommendation report for consideration by council. The applicant is proposing an official plan amendment to direct longer-term redevelopment of the subject lands, including approximately 11 new buildings ranging in height from 8 to 28 stories, approximately 1,847 residential units, together with 85,000 square feet of retail, a 1-acre public park, together with 1 new urban square, and a new public and private street network within the subject lands. A virtual public information meeting was hosted by the applicant on January 19th of this year, which was attended by approximately 86 residents. Next slide, please. The subject lands are comprised of 4.8 hectares, consisting of 5 property parcels, which are occupied by commercial buildings and located at the northwest corner of Kerr Street and Spears Road. In terms of context, the Metrolink Lakeshore Go West corridor is located to the north, followed by business employment uses. Kerr Street, then a commercial plaza, and a 19 and 21 story condominium building is located to the east. Spears Road, then commercial and a low density residential neighborhood is located to the south. and business employment is located to the west. I'd like to draw your attention to the numbering of the property parcels on the air photo and note that all property owners except parcel number 5, being 171 Spears Road, are applicants of the subject application. While property parcel number 5 is not a participating landowner at this time, the parcel has been included in this official plan amendment application to demonstrate the potential full build out of the whole block. Next slide, please. In terms of urban structure, the subject lands are located within a node and corridor and a main street area, and also adjacent to a regional transit priority corridor on Schedule A1 of Livable Oakville. While higher intensity forms of mixed-use growth are directed towards nodes and corridor, Kerr Village is recognized in the urban structure as a main street area for its distinctive character and is intended to accommodate relatively lesser amounts of intensification. Regional transit priority corridors provide a key focus for transit supportive development. Next slide, please. Within Kerr Village, the subject lands are located within the Upper Kerr Village District, which is planned to be transit supportive and a mixed-use area where higher density forms of development are permitted. The subject lands are designated urban core, which permit buildings ranging from 8 to 12 stories and are also eligible for an additional 4 stories of height through bonusing. So that's a total of 16 stories with bonusing. I'd like to draw your attention to the gray dashed line within the subject lands, which represents the planned extension of Shepherd Road and St. Augustine Drive. The subject lands are also subject to an exception policy for this site, which I've included on this slide, and I would like to point out subsection A, which requires a comprehensive development plan across the entirety of the subject lands to demonstrate the potential full build out. Next slide, please. In terms of urban design and parks, while the staff report provides more detail, I would like to draw your attention to 5 key items that should be reflected in the comprehensive development plan. As shown on the schedule, the blue and yellow lines indicate primary and secondary streets, respectively. These streets are intended to be a focus for pedestrian-oriented streetscapes through the use of wide sidewalks, landscaping, furnishings, together with ground floor commercial uses. The 2 circles at Kerr Street and Spears Road and Kerr Street and the Railway represent gateway locations. They are intended to be visually prominent entry points into Kerr Village, which may include well-designed built form or structures, distinctive streetscape treatments, landscaping, and public art. The red asterisk denotes the requirement for a new urban square, which is intended to be open to the public. Similarly, the Kerr Village policies require the provision of a new urban park be located within the subject lands, which would also be open to the public. Lastly, the westerly extension of Shepherd Road and the northerly extension of St. Augustine Drive is denoted by the dash line and is an important requirement for future development. Next slide, please. So in terms of what's proposed, the official plan amendment is based on a comprehensive development plan, which proposes 1,847 residential units ranging in height between 8 to 28 stories. It includes the westerly extension of Shepherd Road and the northerly extension of St. Augustine Drive, an approximately 1 acre public park, together with an urban square. The applicant's comprehensive development plan is based on 6 key moves, which I'll briefly summarize. Next slide, please. The first move is to extend the vibrancy of Kerr Street north through the establishment of a publicly accessible urban square at the northwest corner of Kerr Street and Spears Road, which would interface with plans for a grocery store and connect to the proposed at-grade street frontages north along Kerr Street and west along Spears Road. The second move speaks to the 2 gateway locations I pointed out. The applicant intends to direct the highest building heights to these 2 locations, and that's the 28 and the 26-story building. This location, together with the orientation and design of these buildings, is intended to create a strong gateway image for Kerr Village. Next slide, please. The third key move relates to establishment of the 1 acre public park I mentioned, which is intended to provide a central gathering space. Of note, the applicant is proposing strata ownership of the park, which would allow for private parking to be located under the proposed public park. The fourth key move speaks to the westerly extension of Shepherd Road and the northerly extension of St. Augustine Drive required by Livable Oakville, with the addition of a new mid-block publicly accessible private street and 2 mid-block pedestrian connections to link Kerr Street, Spears Road, and the public park. The fifth key move speaks to the establishment of urban blocks, which would be coordinated with the existing property boundaries to support a phased development. And finally, the last key move speaks to creating a dynamic built form with a mix of mid-rise and tall buildings with building heights ranging from 8 to 28 stories, which generally transition from the 2 gateway locations to the low-rise residential neighborhood south of Spears Road at St. Augustine Drive. Next slide, please. In terms of phasing, the comprehensive development plan contemplates phasing amongst the 4 landowners which are participating in the subject official plan amendment application through a temporary cul-de-sac of a westerly extension of Shepherd Road and an extension of the publicly accessible private road south to Spears Road to create an interim road network, essentially forming a crescent. This is accompanied by new cost-sharing policies, which would apply to all landowners. Next slide, please. So in terms of the official plan amendment, this slide summarizes the amendments being sought to Livable Oakville, or in other words, and generally speaking, the key differences between the enforced policies and the comprehensive development plan proposed by the applicant. In general, the proposed framework proposes several new permissions and other policies which build on the existing policy framework, which I'll briefly summarize. In terms of building height, 7 new tower zones are proposed with increased height permissions ranging from 22 to 28 stories. So under the official plan amendment, maximum building heights would range from 8 to 28 stories with bonusing in comparison to 8 to 16 stories with bonusing under the current policies. A new density limit of 3.4 floor space index is proposed, whereas the current policies do not include a specific density limit. The commercial policies would build off the existing policy, which encourages the retention of the food store and include minimum non-residential floor area requirements for each block. The requirement for the urban park is proposed to be maintained with added policy to specify the minimum size, that's 1 acre, and the specific location together with permissions for strata ownership. So that's the private parking under the public park. The requirement for an urban square is proposed to be maintained, and a policy would be added specifying a minimum size of 500 square meters. Additional urban design direction is also proposed in terms of at-grade animated frontages, at-grade retail locations, tower floor plates, and treatment of above-grade parking structures. The westerly extension of Shepherd Road and the northerly extension of St. Augustine Drive is proposed to be maintained, with the addition of 1 new mid-block private road, which was not contemplated in the current policies. Finally, more specific phasing policies, cost-sharing policies are also proposed, together with designation of the site as a Class 4 area, which relates to permissions for higher noise level limits in an urban context. Next slide, please. So the next 3 slides replicate the issues and matters that have been identified in the staff report for further review and consideration. In general, these matters are focused on the proposed changes to Livable Oakville, which are proposed through this OPA, which I mentioned, and generally relate to climate change, suitability of the comprehensive development plan. Next slide, please. The suitability of land for intended use, impact and integration of the proposed development on adjoining properties. Next slide, please. The appropriateness of phasing, including the proposed cost-sharing policies, urban design and function of the site, And lastly, consistency and conformity with applicable provincial, regional, and town policy. Next slide, please. In conclusion, Your Worship, staff put forth the following recommendation as shown for Council's consideration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barrett. I hope that that's very helpful to the delegations. Councillor Duddick and Councillor Chisholm, did you want to get in ahead of the delegation or do you want to wait?
I just as soon ask some questions because I dare say there are going to be ones that will be raised by our delegations as well. But I'm at your preference.
Earlier, I thought it was it would be congenial to let them raise questions and then we backstop them and
That's
raise
fine.
ones that
I'll
they
stand
didn't.
down.
And I just thought it would feel more participatory and everything. Councillor Chisholm, is that all right with you as well? Okay, thank you. Madam Clerk, would you call the listed delegation and welcome her to the meeting?
The listed delegation is Nicole LeBlanc, and she's president of the West River Residents Association.
Ms. LeBlanc, welcome to the meeting. Council looks forward to your information. I do hope you have issues to add to the list. And all you have to do is unmute yourself, as I understand it, and we're ready for you.
It takes a quick second for me to get everything organized here, but here I am. Thank you for having me today, Mayor Burton and council members. I am actually vice president of the West River Residents Association, and we have a few points that I will cover right now. So I have split my comments into 4 categories. 1 is speaking to the density and height. 2 is talking about the complete community. 3 is talking about the development process, promises. And then 4 is about the land ownership. So starting with the first topic, trying to get my camera and things where I want them, apologies. So for density and height, Urban Strategies, the applicant, has stated that our proposal meets the and incorporates the town's objectives for the area. And although it incorporates the basic structural elements, it does not fit within the official plan for density and height. Urban Strategies is asking for a significant increase in the allowable density beyond that provided for in the town's official plan. The building heights have already been talked about, so I won't go through the specifics. Paul did really share that the official plan allows in an urban core area between 8 and 12 stories with some additional 4 stories of height depending on provisions of public benefit. If full bonusing is achieved and we leave it with the official plan, the 7 tallest towers would be 16 stories. If full bonusing is achieved, the maximum height allowed by the official plan for the 7 tallest towers would be 16 stories, resulting in 112 floors. The proposal is for a total of 51 additional floors across these towers, which is a level 46% above that allowed in the official plan. What is the developer's rationale for thinking that an almost 50% increase is appropriate? If no bonusing was achieved, the proposal represents a 90% increase over the official plan. Also, with regards to the placement of the largest towers, they really should not be part of the gateway. They put these towers in these gateway locations, which seems odd. They really should probably face the train tracks. And the large towers create a chasm dividing neighborhoods. It doesn't feel welcoming in this plan. As well, with the density and height, this would really affect traffic. And given the West River neighborhood is directly across the other side of Shepherd down Queen Mary, it really would affect our neighborhood. A lot of people use our streets to avoid the lights on Kerr Street. And so in the prior public meetings, the applicant did not address our questions about traffic utilizing Queen Mary to avoid those lights on Kerr Street. And the traffic study didn't really take into account a percentage of cars that would utilize Queen Mary either. So I did check, and in the traffic study, There's very little discussion of Queen Mary except where it states to be sensitive to negative traffic impacts on Queen Mary Drive through access control, restricted parking standards, and transit amenities. I'm looking for more information on what does this mean for us. So the proposal on additional density is well beyond what can be accommodated in the area in this regard. On the second topic of complete community, we've talked about the fact that a grocery store is part of the plan, but I think we really need to specify that there's a need for a discount grocery store to remain at this location to serve the demographics of the area. We, as the WRA, are acutely aware of many residents who take advantage of school food programs and local food banks. The proposal shows what has been deemed in earlier meetings an urban size footprint. This would be too small to accommodate a discount grocery store. Urban grocery stores tend to be smaller and more expensive. For those on the call, maybe thinking about a Sobeys Urban Fresh versus the existing Food Basic. The other parts of complete community are a drugstore. We would like to see accommodation of a drugstore to be defined in this area, as well as a post office, showing dedication to continue that being available to our residents. Talking about visitor parking, since this is a mixed-use development in an area that serves many car-reliant customers, it is imperative to have a full complement of visitor parking. The aim should be over and above the minimum set by the province for building permits, specifically due to the location and what it is taking over. With reference to the park, the location of the park seems that it would get lost amongst the very large surrounding buildings and then really unknown to the wider community. How can the park become more of a visible feature in this area? And then on the last topic within the complete community area, the GO train access. At the earlier session, the traffic consultant mentioned the use of electric scooters for commuters going to the GO station. Is it really expected that people dressed for work and carrying briefcases, computer bags, or other work equipment would use a scooter to get to the station? Current Ontario law prohibits carrying cargo or having a basket on an e-scooter. Those that live in the area also know that the sidewalks and the hill on Spears Road are very difficult to navigate for the able-bodied in the snow. Those sidewalks aren't cleared very well. The hill is very big. How would we accommodate those with mobility issues? On the third topic of development promises, the park, the urban square, the gateway, and the grocery store are all described as potential. What is the commitment to actually delivering these items? Yes, this is early, but we need to make sure that these are dedicated. The applicant also mentioned that many people were supportive of the 25+ stories in the development. They did not back this up with any data of who or how many people out of the, I think they said 86 residents that were on the call. But my belief was that this meeting was conducted before many people had the chance to review the official plan policies, to be more aware of how far over the official plan the height actually was. I am here to state our disapproval of the height and density of the proposal and that it should fit within the basis of the official plan for the urban core designation. In the prior information, actually in a prior information session before the public one, Urban Strategies also quoted to us, the WRA, that the number of units for the proposal was actually 850, which is approximately 1,000 units less than the plan entails. This was incredibly misleading and should be addressed as to what they were in fact referring to. As well, just a comment to the applicant that going forward, public information sessions should take into account that participants should be able to see who else is on the call. All questions should be visible to all participants, and that they must address all questions either during the call itself or the notes distributed afterwards. And lastly, the fourth area being the land ownership, which was addressed a little bit through Paul's summary. But how can this proposal be deemed complete when the developers include property that they don't have the owners on board with. That this proposal is jeopardizing the current business there and employment in the area. So we really do want to see more of what the plan looks like beyond, you know, the one visual without the disputed lands. Thank you very much, Mayor Burton and Council.
Thank you very much, Ms. LeBlanc, for a very good presentation. I caught several issues that I think Director will be listing. We have another delegation, Council, who has phoned in. You know, the pitch for phoning in has worked. We have another delegation. Madam Clerk, would you bring in I'm assuming the hands that you have up, Council, are for getting in line for later. Is that right? No? Well, all right then. Councilor Chisholm, do you want to do something before we hear the other delegation?
No, I'd be fine. Let's hear the other delegation. We'll pipe in afterwards. Thank
Okay,
you.
and Councilor Dudek, do I understand you correctly?
I would like to ask Nicole a couple of questions, please.
Well then, let's have at it then. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your attending and giving such a succinct report in regards to concerns on behalf of the West River residents. I know that Councilor Chisholm and I have benefited by having a chance to meet with you along with others to discuss some of those concerns. For the benefit of my colleagues who have not participated in those, even though you've expressed concerns with the heights that are being proposed in this comprehensive plan, is there a preference for a limit on the height? I know you said the extreme that they're going to gives you concern, and the existing maximum is a 16-story with bonusing, not as of right, but with bonusing. So is there, what shall I say, a range by which it would still give a comfort level for residents in the area?
I think 16 should be the limit with the bonusing.
Okay.
Personally, I think that it's difficult because we can look across the street to the Rain and Senses condo, which I believe off the top of my head is maybe 21 and 22 stories. But I don't think we should use that as a, you know, bar that has already been set. This is a much larger development with more density across the board. So they can have more towers, and therefore they should really max out at the current official plan of 16.
Okay.
With bonus.
The other question that maybe I missed it in your presentation, but I know that it's something that both Councilor Chisholm and I hear repeatedly from not only residents in the West River area, but the condo owners, apartment dwellers, and people on the west side of Kerr, is the intersection of Kerr and Spears being extremely difficult for pedestrians. Can you comment whether or not you've had any concerns raised in that regard?
Well, I think traffic in general is an extreme concern. That intersection absolutely is horrific. The current construction going on there, it obviously makes it even worse than it would be on a good day. But I truly feel that the traffic reports that I've tried to skim through so far have not adequately really shown where pedestrians are going to adequately cross and make that intersection any better, because it's a small but very, very busy intersection. And yes, our residents, actually one of our board members lives in one of the towers on the southeast corner of Kerr and Spears, and she doesn't own a car. She's on her feet, pedestrian all day long, and that we hear about that intersection every week. So it is a huge problem that should absolutely be addressed with this as well.
Thank you. And would it also be of benefit to consider in that framework a crossing at Shepherd and Kerr, given the fact that you may very well have people coming from the West River using the Shepherd Road to come across versus wanting to use the Kerr Spears?
I would expect that there would still be a crossing there as there currently is. So
Okay.
I would expect that it would probably change given this new development, but
Okay.
there is a proper pedestrian crossing there. And since there's not a fourth intersection, that one seems actually a little bit better than the current Spears at this point.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Councillor Grant?
I actually just wanted to thank Ms. LeBlanc for possibly one of the best, most researched, well-done presentations ever. And I'm hoping that we could get a copy of that from her, mainly because I want to frame it, but also because we should probably use that for reference as we go through. To Councillor Dudek, I should point out that I'm usually transferring to one of the 4 buses that are at that intersection at Current Spears, and can confirm that you never know where a car is coming from half the time. And that is at the current status of that intersection. So thank you very much, Ms. LeBlanc. That was just fantastic. I'm speechless. Well, obviously not, but I will be now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grant. So now, Councillor Chisholm, you still have your hand up, so I don't want to rush to the next delegation if you have something now.
Well, I guess I might as well pipe in now, and I was going to wait for the last delegation, but my congratulations to Nicole. With our discussions with Councillor Dudek and myself and Nicole, we've had some really detailed discussions, and they're very familiar with the issues and challenges of this development. This is not a one-off development. This is a comprehensive site development, which is going to take some years to put together because of the size and the nature of it. My concern is, and I have a couple of questions of staff, and one would be, is that we're looking at 1,847 units with a park of a 1 acre park comedy. That could be 3,000 residents. Is there anything within the standards, Paul, with respect to that number of people with a small 1 acre park? And I'll add my other part of the park too, with respect to where it's located. Is there any standard with respect to park size and the number of residents in the area, in this new area? Excuse me.
Through your worship, this summer, Parks and Open Space Strategy is intended to be presented to Council, which will look at the right standard for these type of higher density developments in growth areas. Together with that, it will be comprehensive in the sense that it will also consider private open space that's open to the public. So in this example, that would include the urban square at the corner of Current Spears, which is proposed. The current standard in the Parks, Recreation, and Library Facility Master Plan, which is used as a provisional target in terms of has been used for planning, and that's 2.2 hectares for around 1,000 residents. Mm-hmm. So if you were to apply it on this basis, the whole site is around 4.8 hectares in size. So the requirement for parkland would exceed the size of the site. So this is something that is being reviewed by staff, and it will be presented comprehensively to Council likely this summer.
Thanks, Paul. Through the mayor too, with respect to the location of this 1 acre park, it just my opinion on this is that it becomes a closed compound. It's not a visual access for the public. Could there be consideration of looking at the redevelopment? I know time goes on, but looking at this park at more of a visual opportunities for the public to use rather than enclosed it into the built form. We have another one, the same thing on the D&D lands. Got a beautiful park in there, but people don't even know it's there. So that's the challenge, is making sure that is happening. So the question is to go back and say any consideration to looking at the redesign of that park and to make it more visual for the public realm. So the other question I have with respect to the height of the buildings and where they're located, and Nicole hit this bang right on. I know we look at the Kerr Street growth area, and it's not a designated growth area. It's our commercial core area. With respect to looking at buildings on Kerr Street, we're looking at 6 stories at minimum, but setback where you have 2 or 3 in the front, and then you go up in height as you go back. This seems to be contradictory with respect to what we want to do, especially the one at 28 stories on Kerr Street. My suggestion is there any way we can looking at those height of those buildings and refiguring those in those other areas closer to the tracks and so forth to take away from the tunnel, what we call the tunnel component of Kerr Street, knowing we have the rain across the street. So that's something that maybe we could consider looking at, that of a rejigging or reorganization of those buildings. The other concern, and Nicole was bang right on too, with respect to the social economic of that area, and knowing full well that food basics is a very important part of that community, and we are looking at complete communities. Do we have an idea of how much square footage existing commercial retail is there now? I know they're looking at 85,000 to move forward on this development throughout the years and phasing it in, but I would like to know what we have existing, because my concern is that with this residential putting in here, we're going to lose a lot of our retail commercial. And the other thing too is surface parking with respect to the grocery store. As indicated by Nicole, we're not looking for an urban grocery store. We're looking for something that has a large space for people in that area. And if we're increasing our density, we need to look at something more in balance to that whole development. And what I'm seeing right now, I don't see that. And so if we can look at that too, it's a consideration of balance between retail and residential in that site. I think I've covered everything. Everything Nicole has said has been very effective and impactful with respect to the residents, knowing she's really, what Nicole has done is echoed the residents on east and west side of Kerr Street with concerns about this comprehensive development. So I'll just leave it as that, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Council, we have another delegation, as I say, Lee Corin, and the clerks will admit them now, I hope.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. We hear you very well. I want to thank you for your patience. I had hoped to get you in before council fell upon this topic quite so much, but we're ready to hear you now.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking my call. My name is Lee Corin, and I sit on the board of directors for the Halton Condominium Corporation 46, and we are located at 20 Spears Road. We're on the south side of Spears, and along with us are, let's see, 1, 2, 3 other multi-family apartments. And my issue that I would like to have noted this evening is traffic. I think that this new development sounds all wonderful, but the traffic right now on Spears for us to exit from our property is, well, I'll tell you, if we're making a right-hand turn, it's really okay. But if we're trying to make a left-hand turn and go up towards Kerr, it's like when I first moved in here 8 years ago, was really okay. Now we have the rain condos and the growth in this area, and it's just really, really, really hard to make a left out of our property to continue on along Spears to Kerr. So I just wanted to bring this issue up that hopefully somebody's looking at the traffic and what needs to be done to accommodate all this new development.
Yes, thank you. That is one of the duties that the planners have on this file. And but thank you very much for making it more real by describing your experience over the last 8 years. That's very helpful.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for being alive to the meeting and watching and calling in. Appreciate that.
Well, it's been very interesting. Oh, and actually, Nicole's presentation was very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Council, we can now, I believe, confine this to your table. Councillor Dudek. Councillor Dudek has the only one with her hand up, so second time or not, she gets to go. Councillor Dudek. Oh,
Thank you,
excuse me.
Worship.
You have a competitor, Councillor Dudek. Councillor Hazlitt Thiel wants to go. So.
Okay, that's fine. Would you like to go first?
No, Mayor Burton, Kathy had her hand up first. I'm prepared.
Okay.
Right.
We have a first time and second time speaker rule in our procedure bylaw. That's all I was trying to enforce here. Councillor Dudek, the councillor yields her time to you, or her position in the order. Away you go.
And I appreciate that gesture. Some of the questions, first of all, can I commend you, Paul, for an extremely thorough and well-written report. You're well known for that. But the fact that you've outlined 2.5 pages basically of issues and concerns, you've really scoped it down quite well for us. There's some things that sort of come to the forefront. The fact, and it was raised earlier, that number 5, 171 Spears, is being portrayed or captured in this comprehensive plan. And given the fact that he is not part of the application in terms of participating in the discussions that went with the other 4 landowners, how can they display something on his lands? And it's very, what shall I say, telling that his property is being shown at the low end of the height, where their properties all show an extremely over-the-top height limit. And the reason I say that is because I know with 550 Kerr Street, one of the requests we had at the time in considering that application was wanting a comprehensive plan. And at the time, there was a submission that was just from that one applicant's point of view. Are we not just doing the same thing by doing this way, that a certain landowner is taking the liberty of saying, this is what I see should happen on your land?
Through you, Your Worship, to Councillor Dudek, the requirement for a comprehensive development plan, it's a requirement of livable Oakville. It's a site-specific requirement for this site, and it's really important to achieve comprehensive and integrated planning for this site. And I can give you some examples from previous landowner coordination meetings where individual landowners were coming in with different plans that didn't align. So for example, roads on one parcel didn't align with roads on another. One parcel would include part of a public park. The other parcel of the public park would be located on another site, not connected to each other. So it's really important for that comprehensive framework to be developed across the entirety of the subject lands. That doesn't mean that development is imminent on any part of the site. This official plan amendment application speaks more to developing that comprehensive framework for which individual development applications in the fullness of time could come in and be evaluated against.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate totally the connection of the public roadways in that. I guess my concern is, and maybe for the benefit of the public, because I know we've talked about this at length, because it's being a comprehensive plan, and because you may have various landowners wanting to participate in developing their lands at various times, when we get to the point of approving this plan, are we giving our consent to the heights that are indicated on that property, or that plan rather. My concern being, again, that if the landowner on the number 5 property has been shown as 8 stories, does he have to face an uphill battle similar to what maybe the others are doing, because they're going for 24, 26, 28 stories on their property, but the plan shows a lower height and density on his? Does that lock him in going forward?
Through your worship, the official plan amendment application does not propose to, in other words, downzone 171 Spears Road. The height limit of 8 to 12 stories would continue to apply, and this official plan amendment would grant additional height along the rail corridor to the north as well on 171 Spears, or parcel number 5.
Okay, thank you. And speaking of the roadways, I note that we've got a public roadway, and then you referenced a private roadway. Is there a width difference in terms of a private roadway and a public roadway?
Through you, your worship, there would be a difference in widths, and that's being reviewed through the transportation impact study. The private road in this development scenario, it would be a lower order road, so it certainly would be narrower in width. However, it would still need to achieve the urban design objectives, such as the wider sidewalks, commercial at grade in certain areas. And it would need to work from a functional perspective as well, when you consider the establishment of a grocery store, trucks using that road for deliveries and so on. So that will be included in the review of this application and future development applications as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I guess my only concern is, having seen other developments who've had similar situations, invariably the reason for not having a public road is to give them more development permissible on that particular parcel. So that would be my concern. And again, from access for the public to be able to use that whole area, that would be a concern for me. And just sort of, you mentioned it earlier, but just for the benefit of those who are watching, when we get to the point where we're considering this plan, how are we going to deal with the phasing, or is that something you'll come back with at a future report? How a phase-in of the various parcels will take place, because you can appreciate the average person, having seen the signs and having heard the discussions taking place in the neighborhood, have been pushing the panic button thinking, oh my gosh, this whole parcel is going to be blown out and we're going to have development on top of the CN underpass taking place, on top of the Kerr or the Spears reconstruction that's going to be taking place up to the Kerr intersection. So maybe explaining or giving some reference how phasing will work at a future date would be beneficial, if staff could sort of explain that a little bit more in depth for them at the time of tabling a report. The other thing is, and we've talked about it in terms of what the existing OP provides, and the only time they mention an additional 4-story 16 is in the bonusing capacity. And just remind me, and again, for benefit of the members of the public, bonusing is not an as of right. In other words, there have to be certain steps, checks and balances, and a community benefit in order to provide that additional height. Is that correct?
Through your worship, that is correct.
Okay.
The bonusing is not an as of right, and it would be in exchange for community benefits.
Is there ever an opportunity, because not only in this area, but throughout Oakville, and affordability is a huge component for housing. Is there ever an opportunity within that bonusing framework where we could require an affordability component for that additional height?
Through your worship, affordability was identified in the Kerr Village plan as one of the items eligible for bonusing for this specific area. The challenge that will be presented for this development application, however, is the province's plans to phase out Section 37 and the time horizon of this development. So in terms of the timeline, the town would have until September 22nd of this year to pass a zoning bylaw, which includes those bonusing provisions in order for them to continue on, in order for them to be in effect.
Okay. Thank you. I realize that's, a concern not only on this site, but others that are currently under process. I guess the question that is sort of piggybacking, and I'm pleased to hear that we're going to be having an opportunity through our Parks and Rec staff providing us some feedback as to what constitutes a proper park, because sort of building on what Councillor Chisholm had referenced, there is a concern that you end up with these sort of postage stamp parks amidst this whole development. So that is a concern. The other one last comment or question I would have, and maybe it's not something we can deal with right now, but maybe down the road, so I'll just put a placeholder. There's a 30-meter strip along the railway that's under the ownership, I believe, of Metrolinx. And so there's no development that's permitted on that property. Is there a possible opportunity to have some sort of passive recreation, i.e. a dog park, something that would be of benefit to the residents who are going to be in those buildings? We don't have a leash-free park in the Ward 2 area anywhere, but I know we've had expressions of concern not only with West River, but with people in the rain condos saying there's no place for them to exercise their dogs. So just to sort of put a note that maybe at some point when we're having discussions with Metrolinx through this process to see whether or not there's some sort of an opportunity to have a partnership there. Anyway, thank you very much for your report.
Thank you, Councillor Dudek. Councillor Haslett-Deal.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. In your list of items to review, you talk about the designation of the subject lands as a Class 4 area pursuant to NPC 300. So one of my questions is, what other areas in Oakville have a Class 4 designation?
Through your worship, I'm not aware of any other areas in Oakville that are subject to Class 4 designation. It's a designation that's relatively new, that's provided by the ministry, and the applicant has submitted a noise study which speaks to the Class 4 area designation in detail, which will be reviewed by staff as part of this development application, including the appropriateness of a Class 4 area.
So thank you for that. Just as a follow-up to it, because Livable Oakville talks about appropriate mitigation on sensitive lands and from noise and vibration, and it also includes restrictions on types of use. So how would you evaluate the elimination of a use in this regard? So would it be you can't build to that height or that close? Are those options?
Through your worship, it would speak to land use compatibility. Within this context, there's an employment area to the west, and there's a rail corridor to the north. Both of those are noise sources to a sensitive land use such as residential, and land use compatibility to the residential and also to the employment area so it can continue to function is a consideration. And it's something that will be reviewed through this development application.
So when you report back, will you talk about what the threshold has to be for them to achieve, satisfactory mitigation?
Through you, Worship, the recommendation report will provide an analysis on land use compatibility. It'll include the performance standards, so the noise level limits. The specific mitigation measures would likely be deferred to a more detailed design stage, such as zoning and site plan approval. But the recommendation report will address the principle of land use, which in this case is mixed use residential.
Right. Thanks very much. And I was very appreciative of the earlier question about resident to green space, and I look forward to that discussion this summer. I think it's one that's on all our minds. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any more hands. Who wants to move them? Well, let's turn to the director and see what additional items he's added to his list, and then I'll take Councillor Chisholm's motion, if I read your signal correctly, Councillor.
Thank you,
Charles.
Mr. Mayor. And through your, a number of the items that were raised have been identified through Mr. Barrett's report, but to underline a number of them, what I can offer is the consideration of the park location to ensure its accessibility to the public, consider the overall distribution of building height across the development site, the mix and distribution of land uses, so again, that would be the park, retail, commercial opportunities, and how the phasing and future development will occur. So those items we will highlight further in the recommendation report.
So, Council, I'm going to interpret that as you liked Mr. Barrett's list of concerns so much that you decided to reinforce them by covering them in greater depth. Mr. Charles, could I ask you to add one more issue to the list, please? I'd like you to cover the impact on the proposal if Metrolinx reneges on the grade separation at Kerr. And I ask that because Metrolinx has a sad history in Oakville of not doing what it promises. And so I think we have to be aware that, we could be let down yet again. The most spectacular failure being their announcement in 2006 that there would be a BRT operating by 2016 up and down Trafalgar Road. And so I fear continued disappointment from Metrolinx when I see the province coming up with money for canceled square one loops in Mississauga of an LRT. And I just fear that we could be left holding the proverbial bag, or maybe it's the provincial bag yet again. So if you could add that, that would be great. Councillor Chisholm, assuming that you're moving all that, I accept your motion. Thank you very much. Council, is there any objection to the motion? Seeing none, that is carried, and I thank everybody. Now, what I had thought could be the main event tonight, certainly a really important event, is we have a presentation from Jill Stevens, the Director of Transportation and Engineering, and Jeff Abma, our Senior Planner for Policy Planning and Heritage, on the Oakville Urban Mobility and Transportation Strategy. And Council, we've received a suggestion from Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel that we modify the recommendation to receive the information and refer the matter back to staff for public consultation and community input. And that is, and I support that. And I thank the councillor for forwarding that. Ms. Stephen, we are ready and we are all ears and eyes. Edify us and the public, please.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Burton and members of council. The urban mobility and transportation strategy that's here before you tonight is a joint effort between the transportation and engineering and planning departments. Work began on the urban mobility and transportation strategy a little over 2 years ago when we retained Steer to undertake this project. The urban mobility and transportation strategy builds on the solid foundation of plans and policies that are already in place for both land use and transportation in Oakville. Land use planning and transportation planning really need to go hand in hand to support the vision and goals for our community. The strategy development recognized that key connection between land use and transportation, and the result is a plan that not only talks about the vision and what we should do to achieve that, but also included the discussions about the challenges we may encounter along the way and the changes we may need to make regarding infrastructure design, construction, or maintenance. This strategy was developed to connect the transportation and land use vision, to guide the development of our next transportation master plan, and as well as other master planning documents, and to provide the tools to help the town meet the goals we have for mobility in our community. And I'll now turn it over to Jeff Abma, who will present the strategy for you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stephen, and thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Can I have the next slide, please? So I think it's important to start off here with some context, and I'm going to begin where I often begin, with the fact that Oakville and Halton are growing, but also provide some perspective by showing how this urban mobility and transportation strategy is not a standalone initiative, but is actually a key piece of guiding Oakville into the future, and that it's in alignment with many of our initiatives that we already have going on. So the slide that you see here, I've used a number of times, so you may have seen it before. It's really my attempt to show that the province has a growth plan, and it directs municipalities to plan to accommodate future anticipated growth going forward. The growth plan specifies the number of people and jobs that Halton Region needs to plan to accommodate, and then Halton, through its integrated growth management strategy, which is a hot topic of late, is figuring out how to distribute all of that to us locals within Halton. And that's what the preferred growth concept being considered up at the region is all about. It's really Halton's growth management strategy for the next 30 years and potentially even beyond. Next slide, please. And Oakville has its own growth management strategy too that fits into that. It's our town-wide urban structure, which you've already seen tonight, and it's shown up in the top right. And at its heart, our urban structure is quite straightforward. It's a system of growth nodes of walkable, complete communities supported by higher ordered transit corridors. And it's to this system of nodes and corridors that we want to direct the majority of our future growth in Oakville. And I also really like this graphic from the region that's shown here because I think it gives a quick and easily understandable notion of what that built form and corridor might look like at a conceptual way. Next slide, please. So within Oakville, we have a number of strategic growth areas, some of which we've talked about tonight, and they're represented by the circles on this map, which are then connected by strategic corridors. And it's certainly no coincidence that these corridors are one and the same as the transit priority corridors described up at the regional level. But our urban structure is not just how we build places to live and work, it's also about how we move people in and through this type of environment. So the success of our urban structure shown here really depends on how well we integrate a whole lot of different ways of moving people and goods within the design of these growth nodes and the transit corridors that connect them. Quite frankly, we simply cannot rely on private cars to move everyone around. And that's where the urban mobility and transportation strategy becomes a vital part of making sure that this urban structure of ours is successful. Next slide, please. And here's some more really important context, the climate change angle. And as you know, Council has declared a climate change emergency, so we need to look for ways to reduce our impact on climate change. And let me be clear here, choices the town makes with respect to mobility will have significant implications on how effective we will actually be at doing this. So if you take a look at the town's community energy strategy, it says transportation accounts for almost half of community-wide greenhouse gas emissions and total dollars spent on energy in Oakville. And then later on, it says over 70% of transportation activity is person vehicle use. You'll also find this other stat that I've shown here. Oakville's homes alone contribute 27% of the community's greenhouse gas emissions. So what this means is that driving our cars and heating and cooling our homes, these two things represent 77% of Oakville's greenhouse gas emissions. So these two areas should be where we are directing most of our efforts if we want to combat climate change. Next slide, please. So now let's turn to the urban mobility and transportation strategy that STEER has come up with and see what it has to say. So STEER is very clear that the town of Oakville has long developed around the private automobile. And as a result, the predominant auto-dependent built form in Oakville and the prevailing transport mode of choice of its residents, i.e. the private automobile, reflects that history. And STEER also indicates that right now, Oakville is at a turning point in its development. Next slide, please. So STEER follows this up with a warning. And STEER says if things do not change from this trajectory of car dependency, the town will not be able to accommodate the demands of a future that come from existing within a growing region. One way you could look at this is it's flat out saying that we just won't be able to make car dependency work moving into the future, nor will it be able to adapt to an evolving transportation landscape. So the evolving transportation landscape includes things like connected and automated vehicles, electric vehicles, other advances in micro-mobility, and so on. And then lastly, it will not be able to respond to a changing climate. And I think this is pretty clear that what STEER's saying is that if we continue with how we've grown and developed in the past as a car-dependent community, we simply won't be able to respond in a meaningful way to climate change. Next slide, please. So even the town's current transportation master plan highlights that things need to change moving forward. So let me highlight a couple things that you can find in our current transportation master plan. Next, please. It was recognized that additional widening is not feasible to address screen line deficiencies. So if you're like me and you're not a traffic engineer, what this essentially means, and let me translate, is we cannot continue to widen our roads in order to accommodate more and more people in Oakville. Next, please. The plan goes on to say alternative solutions should be sought to alleviate congestion, including, and then it lists things like active transportation. So walking, biking, cycling, rolling on scooters, rollerblades, kick scooters, all those type of things, anything that's active, public transit initiatives, and intersection improvements, and so on and so forth. Next, please. Quite simply, space is limited within our rights of way. Next, please. So now let me show you an example of why we really can't rely on widening our roads as more and more people move to Oakville. And I know I've shown this to you before, but I really think it's worth showing again. So here's a photo of Third Line as it exists today. And I chose this example simply because it has some of the street elements that help make Oakville a livable place. It's got, of course, travel lanes for vehicles. It's got sidewalks for pedestrians. It's got a bicycle path on one side. Yeah, I think it'd be better if there was one on the other side, but we'll get to that. It also has a median that can accommodate street trees and contribute to the town's tree canopy cover. So this part of Third Line also has existing neighborhoods on either side, which means that the right-of-way is essentially fixed. You really can't widen it at all. So if you were to add a lane to accommodate more cars, next please, we'd start to lose some of those valuable pieces of the street. So in this example, the bike path and the sidewalks could be taken over by that extra lane. And then if we add another lane to the other side of the road as well, next please, we'd likely lose the median capable of growing trees, and we'd lose the tree canopy that provides as well. Next please. So we'd be left with a road that only moves motorized vehicles and effectively just ignores walking and cycling as really viable forms of travel. So I think this is just one example of why we cannot rely on widening our roads continually as we grow. And it shows what can possibly happen when we don't prioritize walking and cycling and active transportation when we design our streets. So the way to accommodate more and more people is to make sure that Oakville's rights of ways are designed for a wide variety of travel options in order to give people lots of good choices for how they move around, and then be able to take advantage of more space efficient and potentially even energy efficient methods of moving people within our streets. Next, please. So I think the tendency is, and it has been, to frame the transportation problem for Oakville by asking this question. And I will admit I'm borrowing this from a webinar that I attended a few weeks ago. But the question is, you know, if we tend to frame the problem, well, how can we make car dependency work? Stating the problem this way is essentially acknowledging that with more people coming to Oakville, we're going to get congestion. And then the problem is, what can we do to relieve congestion so that we can all still go around driving in cars as the predominant way of getting around? In the webinar, the presenter equated this to asking the question, how can we make cigarette smoking safe? So I think it's generally accepted these days that we really can't make smoking safe. And I think the same goes for the question of car dependency. We simply can't make car dependency work while at the same time keeping our town livable as we grow. So next, please. We need to reframe the question, and maybe it needs to be something more like this. How can we make transport more sustainable, more healthful, more affordable, less exclusive, and less necessary? As an urban planner, I love all of these things, but I really love that last part. How do we make transport less necessary? And that's because I think that's the part that really relates to urban form and how we build. Next, please. So now all of this may paint a dire picture of where Oakville currently is, but I will offer some good news. Oakville has already been trying to change things. I think back to council's endorsement of 7 key transit priorities back in December, when our previous transit director, Barry Cole, at his last P&D meeting with the town, presented these to council. So this is prime evidence that we're trying to change things. And in fact, these transit priorities mesh very well with the recommendations coming out of the urban mobility strategy. Next, please. And I really like what Mr. Cole said about trying to move more people in less vehicles, because that's key when you have fixed right-of-ways. So when you have limited space, the question then becomes, how many people can you move through that space, particularly at peak conditions? So this graphic here demonstrates this in order from least efficient at the top to most efficient at the bottom. Turns out private automobiles at the top are actually the least space efficient form of travel. This gets better if you start mixing in frequent buses. But then there's a real big jump in efficiency when you start introducing two-way protected bikeways. These will actually move more than double the amount of people that cars and buses move. And then dedicated transit lanes add even more efficiency. And you can see sidewalks here, which are actually a very space efficient way to move people. And then finally, on-street transit ways, such as bus rapid transit or light rail transit, as being the most efficient at moving people. So currently in Oakville, we probably utilize 4 of these travel modes, mainly. I mean, we don't have dedicated transit lanes, we don't have BRT yet, so that leaves the other 4. And we do have a pretty robust active transportation master plan, which is great, looking at providing more and more opportunities for walking and cycling. But I suspect that if you compare these 4 modes in terms of how much money we actually spend on them, you may find that we really focus most of our time and resources on only 2 of them, private cars and public buses. So looking at it this way, you could say that in Oakville up until now, we've been emphasizing the least space efficient travel modes as the primary way to move people in our communities. And now we're running out of space. Next, please. So now what happens if we start to prioritize or focus on the forms of transporting people that are both space efficient and energy efficient at moving people and goods? Next, please. Well, this essentially flips the whole hierarchy on its head. So now we see pedestrians, cyclists, and transit riders rising to the top. They become the most important users of our transportation system. The top priorities also include people doing business and providing services, or goods movement is another way to describe this. And then people moving in private cars are not eliminated from the mix. This isn't an anti-car type of a strategy. It's just that their priority as a mode of travel is a lot less moving forward. And I will point out here that this category would also include electric vehicles or electric cars. They still take up valuable space within our right-of-ways, and they still require a hefty amount of energy to move. It's just that their main benefit happens to be that they don't emit greenhouse gases out of their tailpipe. Next, please. So I think this is an important point to make, because I think there may be a potential misconception out there that simply switching to electric power for our vehicles will save us from climate change. But this isn't the case. And I'll share this tweet that I came across the other day. And it says, decarbonizing transport is not just about switching to an electric motor. It also means using, when possible, public transport or cycling. And I think that's the direction that the urban mobility and transportation strategy is pointing us in. Next, please. So at its heart, that's what the strategy is all about. So cars will always be a part of Oakville, but we now need to really focus on providing a whole gamut of other viable and practical choices to move people around other than the automobile, so that it's really easy to choose some of these other modes that may be more efficient at moving people within the limited space that we have. Next, please. So STEER advises that is what is key to making our urban structure successful is linking transportation and land use planning, like Director Steedman has already mentioned. Complete community high density growth nodes, like the ones already identified in our urban structure, will ultimately only work if there are lots of viable choices for moving people around. And when I say viable, those are choices that it's really easy to choose something other than a car for doing it. And in fact, they might actually be the preference for moving around. Just creating high density nodes where everyone still drives will not work. And I couldn't help but think about this in some of the previous items where, we were talking about, well, if you add this much density and everybody drives, we're just going to end up with, roads that are full of cars. And that's not seen as a good thing, obviously. Next, please. So this is why STEER stresses the linking of transportation and land use. First, in order to shift people towards alternative mobility modes, Oakville needs to prioritize these modes. Otherwise, the status quo of auto dependency will continue. And considering that automobile travel has been emphasized for a long time in Oakville, and it has made it a viable, safe, and efficient, Oakville now needs to almost overemphasize the other alternatives to make the alternatives just as viable as safe, efficient, and accessible mobility choices as the car travel is today. So the key role of our transportation network needs to be moving people, not just moving cars. I've heard this described as, don't design your street as a car sewer, just to move cars quickly and fluidly through a community. So this leads to the importance of creating complete streets. And complete streets are ones that accommodate as many travel modes as possible, but particularly emphasizing transit and active transportation. So the second thing that STEER says is that we need to develop a human scale urban form in which the alternative modes of travel are viable and can thrive. And I can't help but think of the conversations we've already had about Midtown earlier tonight. So STEER argues that a lot of Oakville is currently too spread out for more sustainable modes to be viable due to the prevalence of single-use zoning and stringent minimum parking requirements that separate buildings and create lots of separation between the places where we live and then the key destinations that we want to travel to. Therefore, STEER recommends that Oakville concentrate on building complete 15-minute neighborhoods that contain a mix of land uses that can accommodate most of the day-to-day needs of its residents so that they no longer need to actually hop in a car for everything that they do in life. And a lot of it can happen within a short walk or bike ride or even a bus ride of their home. And yeah, there will be times where a car is necessary, but those are definitely lessened. Next, please. So what I really find interesting about where STEER has landed with these two directions is that they also align with what I mentioned earlier about Oakville's community energy strategy. And what it has identified as the two largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in Oakville, namely our cars and our homes. So if we focus on where STEER is recommending that we go, we will also directly address the climate emergency. So for example, reducing our need for and our use of cars will reduce the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And then building more compactly in these 15-minute neighborhoods, using likely attached housing and integrating more apartment dwellings, means that there will be more shared walls between housing units, which certainly helps with efficiency of heating and cooling, particularly when used in conjunction with emerging green building technologies. But in these areas, district energy systems become much more of an opportunity that we can take advantage of, which will again help reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And then lastly, STEER also suggests that travel demand management will also form an important part of this picture. And these are essentially initiatives that are meant to encourage behavior change with the intention of reducing the demand, the overall demand on our transportation system. Next, please. So this strategy is really a large toolbox. It's a large collection of tools for Oakville to use, and then a playbook with lists of actions for how these tools could be used to achieve the desired link between mobility and land use. And so there are a lot of tools in the toolbox and plays in the playbook, shall I say, and I'm not going to talk about each and every one of them, but I do want to give you a sense of what STEER has collected for us. Next, please. So here's an overview of the toolbox, and it's grouped by complete streets, 15-minute neighborhoods, and traffic demand management initiatives. So the complete streets part of the toolbox focuses on all the elements that Oakville can use with respect to making a street network that supports all modes of transport. The 15-minute neighborhood part of the toolbox focuses on the ingredients needed to create complete walkable communities. So it builds on the key nodes, which Oakville is already developing. It provides insight on how to build identified nodes from scratch. And it even suggests how we could potentially begin to retrofit our existing established neighborhoods to make them to start to become 15-minute neighborhoods. Next, please. So there's actually a lot of really good stuff within the strategy document. And here are some quick wins that they've suggested, or low-hanging fruit that STEER identifies for enhancing things for pedestrians and cyclists. Next, please. Then STEER provides some long-term enhancements that will take a little bit longer to implement. And you can see here, one of my personal favorites is winter maintenance of our bikeways, because I love to bike in the winter. Next, please. So for transit, there are a lot of tools here that mirror the 7 transit priorities that you have endorsed back in December. Next, please. So the playbook part of the strategy includes recommendations on how to use these tools to achieve the vision of complete streets and 15-minute neighborhoods. And right off the top, it's immediately acknowledged, though, that not all things are in Oakville's control. And they really emphasize there needs to be aligned coordination with developers, residents, and particularly other agencies like Halton Region and Metrolinx, as the mayor has already mentioned. So the strategy then acknowledges that Oakville has done great strategic work in the past, but it needs to improve its follow through, and suggests that maybe feasibility studies or business cases might be a technique that could be used to accomplish this. The strategy then provides a series of action items aimed to achieve improved strategic documents, new business cases, and that aligned coordination. And of course, we need to do a better job of monitoring everything we do to implement the strategy. And the document has recommendations on how to do this as well. Next, please. So maybe it's becoming obvious to you already that implementing this strategy will involve more than just a transportation master plan and even an official plan. And it cannot be understated that the urban mobility and transportation strategy is bigger than just a transportation master plan or even an active transportation master plan. It includes that, but it's a whole lot bigger. This is a strategy that needs to be worked on and implemented corporation-wide. So if we want to start cracking the climate change nut, build complete and walkable communities, focus on moving people instead of cars, and so on, we need council and every town department doing its part, not only to buy into the message, but also to support and promote it, particularly when making the tough decisions about how and where to use our limited resources. So the philosophy represented by the strategy needs to permeate into much of our thinking and decision-making within the town. It really should be a lens through which we examine much of what the town does, similar to the lens that the climate change is. And it just, like I said, it doesn't just affect planning and transportation and engineering departments, but this includes roads and works departments, parks and recreation, fire services, libraries, municipal enforcement, and so on. All of these play an important role in implementing the strategy. So let me give you a quick example. The strategy suggests a number of potential quick wins that appear easy enough on the surface to implement. Of course, these all require funding first in order to implement it, and the capital funding for design and planning lies within the realm of the Transportation and Engineering Department, who then has it built. The next part is how do we maintain these features? And then in this, of course, lies with operations of the roads and works departments. And so then it's vital for them, for example, to have the operating funds and the crews to maintain these great features that we're going to build if they're going to continue to be effective in the long term. Next, please. So STEER suggests that the primary role of the urban mobility and transportation strategy is to bridge the gap between our past studies, the great work that we've already done, and then our future work. As the strategy says, Oakville is not starting from zero. The town is already advanced in its pursuit of unified land use and transportation policies in recent years, with 8 growth nodes and 2 growth corridors identified in its urban structure and official plan, and a considerable amount of planning work completed to guide their intensification. In time, STEER says, this effort will start to pay off. So the strategy simply builds upon the examples Oakville has already put forward. It presents a high-level strategy for unifying land use and transportation policies at the municipal level to support Oakville's vision for a better tomorrow, at its current growth nodes, at its future ones, and actually everything in between. However, we will need to make key budget decisions in order to implement the recommendations. But this isn't simply a one-time add-on or a single line item in a budget. It represents a new way of thinking about what we do, particularly as we adjust to a new priority of pedestrians, cyclists, transit, and goods movement before personal automobiles. And this isn't necessarily something the town has done historically. So yes, we have a lot to do, but I think it's exciting work. And this strategy really helps to unify our vision of what we are trying to achieve in Oakville going forward, I believe. Next, please. So now I just want to take a moment to talk about public engagement. So public engagement effectively started on the strategy during our work to establish our townwide urban structure. And as I hopefully communicated earlier, the success of our urban structure is dependent on providing lots of choices for moving around to reduce our reliance on cars. And this means emphasizing active transportation and transit as much as possible. Doing so will allow goods movement to continue in our town, as well as private automobile use. I think I've joked before that if you love driving your car, you should be the biggest advocate of this strategy, because getting more and more people to take trips without their cars makes more room for you on the road. So all of that to say that really what this strategy represents is not new. It's been part of the thinking behind the townwide urban structure all along. So now when we first engaged STEER to prepare this strategy, we were enjoying our pre-COVID life before the pandemic. And we held a number of preliminary stakeholder meetings right in town hall. And we also met with the Oakville Chamber of Commerce a number of times to discuss this strategy with them. And then the pandemic hit, which of course added an unexpected wrinkle, as we have all experienced. So we adjusted our work plan and had STEER actually analyze what the effects of the pandemic might be on our transportation system here in Oakville. And we presented that to you back in November of 2020. And actually that piece now forms part of the strategy document. We also had to think about, how are we going to engage the public in light of the pandemic? And as we've discovered, it's potentially tough to engage the public completely online. And yeah, we're learning how to do this, and it's been good, and we've made progress. But at the time, we decided to delay the rest of the public engagement on the strategy, potentially until after restrictions would start to be lifted. And we didn't necessarily expect it would take this long to get there, but we're getting there. We also knew, though, that the intent for this strategy was to inform many other master plans in the town, and each of these would have their own public engagement. And frankly, this is where the nuts and bolts of the strategy will actually be worked out. So we weren't extremely worried that there wouldn't be any engagement, because some had already happened, and we knew that more would continue to happen. So as you've possibly read in the staff report, we hope to launch a communication initiative for this strategy this year. And we're already working with communications on what that might look like. And so now I know it may seem backwards to bring forward this strategy, asking for council endorsement before continuing with our community engagement. However, in light of the current conversations council and regional council are having regarding where and how we grow to the year 2051, and we grapple with the region's preferred growth concept for Halton, we thought it was very important to bring this strategy to council sooner than later, particularly because it has implications for how we grow and how we respond to climate change. Next, please. So that brings us to our recommended next steps. And this slide aligns with the recommendations that we provided to you in our staff report. So first, it is important for you to receive the strategy tonight. But staff believes it needs to be more than just that. Staff is also recommending that council endorse the strategy as a lens through which staff and council evaluate options and make decisions on the prioritization, design, operation, and maintenance of town transportation infrastructure. Third, staff is recommending that the strategy be endorsed as a guiding document to inform the preparation of upcoming town master plans and associated budgets. An example of this definitely is the upcoming review of the transportation master plan that includes the active transportation master plan. And as the strategy recommends, we need to take action on better linking our transportation policies and land use policies. And we have a great opportunity coming up this year. Lastly, and this is by no means least, it's important that we continue with our public engagement with residents, businesses, and developers alike to inform them of the strategy and then talk with them about its importance to the town and its future. The strategy is a vital part of implementing our town-wide urban structure, which is our growth management strategy, and it really is key to its success. I don't believe you can really have one without the other. So thank you for your time, and this concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abma and Ms. Stephen. Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. Excellent presentation, Jeff. I had a couple of questions or comments. You did mention about COVID and having an impact on people working from home being a trend. So it'd be interesting to see what actually impact that will have on car use. But then also things like delivery of food, either groceries or skip the dishes, or Uber Eats and things like that. So that I think something to footnote and see if that trend continues, because I know a lot of companies are now saying, well, is there now going to be a balance of going into the office versus working from home, which will potentially, hopefully, bring less vehicles onto the road if that's the case, if it's a trend that's actually sustained. So I wanted to kind of note that. The other is with respect to public consultation. I think that's going to be extremely important. And I think the Oakville Energy Task Force, as being one of the stakeholders to consult with, and Future Energy Oakville, I think are two kind of key stakeholders that can help with this, because as the task force and the energy strategy came out, it became very clear that it's actually the personal vehicles that has this huge impact, as well as people's homes. So if we don't get active participation from the residents and the people who work in Oakville, this may be for naught. So that's my kind of second comment, kind of statement. But then the last one is, how do we measure success? So as you go through all of this and you come up with the plans and we start connecting land use with transportation, more visibility to that, how do we actually measure how successful this will be to lessen the reliance on single use vehicles versus active transportation versus the 15-minute commute, walk, etc. Like how do we measure that success, and how would we be able to then come back to everyone and say, look, we've done this as a community, it's been very effective, and here's our way of actually being able to measure and demonstrate that.
No, thank you for your comments. I think they're great. And I agree that monitoring our success is key. And I mentioned that because STEER does highlight that in their document about, what type of key performance indicators we could look at. I know, for example, just off the top, modal share, I think is a good indicator of how successful we're being. Because right now, and Jill can correct me if I'm wrong on this, I think it's close to 90% of our trips that we make in Oakville are actually ones that we take in our car. And STEER has identified that there are a lot of really short trips that could easily be done by walking or biking or other modes that we still choose. We still choose our car because we feel it's the easiest, most convenient. So what this strategy is about is trying to make it so those other choices become just as easy to make as hopping in your car, and become just as easy. And that's, it's not an easy task, but I think that's where modal share, for example, like how many trips are we actually using our car for, and how many trips are we actually using other modes is a really good one example of a good indicator of how successful we're being. And I'm sure there are others, and those are just the one, that's just the one that comes to the top of mind.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abma. Councillor Robertson, you're next.
Thank you. The presentation was great. And Jeff, like you, I love the bicycle pieces of it. I think that we are definitely going in the right direction, and the whole report was going in the right direction for new development and new growth areas. My worry is in the south, how we created nodes, growth nodes, so we are going to increase the density, but the north-south pieces, Bronte Road, third line, fourth line, to get up to great bike lanes on Spears are virtually non-existent in terms of safety. And do we look at things like that in terms of the master plan and start figuring out, hey, how do we make this work? Because I realize your limitations in terms of widening to create bike lanes or even creating a multi-use trail are going to be tougher, but to sit there and not look at it at all means we've created growth nodes with no way for people to use active transportation to get to things like the GO station.
Thank you for your comments. And I think, I think the tendency is to look at this as being, oh, this is really helps to inform our new growth nodes. But when I say that this needs to be a lens for how we look at decision-making across the town, it really comes into play for exactly what you're talking about, right? So if we're looking at, say, Third Line or Bronte Road, and we're looking at, okay, what are improvements that we need to make? When you start to prioritize the walking and the cycling and the transit, when you're starting to look at those designs and make those decisions, it actually can, that's where this strategy has a role to play in terms of enhancing our existing neighborhoods and creating those active transportation choices and making them more safe and viable so that, people can choose to, take a bike or walk and not feel like they're jeopardizing their own safety.
Thanks. As long as the South stays into that master plan as where we can go, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Jeff, for your presentation. I'm wondering if staff is taking, I guess, any lessons learned from north of Dundas and implementing those into the strategy, since north of Dundas was planned to be a transit-first community with complete communities and activity nodes, which seem very similar to the 15-minute communities that were mentioned in the report in your presentation. So are we able to reflect and understand what didn't work and as my colleague Councillor Longo put it, measure the successes? I think it would be beneficial to do some community consultation specifically in our denser areas for these communities that were planned to be transit first, and kind of try to understand from the residents what worked and what didn't.
No, those are great points. And I think, within the policy team for sure, we're grappling with North Oakville about, what was the vision? And we've talked, a lot at council about, okay, what was the vision? Why are we not necessarily achieving it? And there's there's a whole bunch of reasons that we've come up with. So I think your point is well taken, that we need to learn from where we've come from. North Oakville isn't quite finished yet, so I haven't lost hope that we can start to get there with, particularly along, some of the transit corridors, as well as, in some of the future activity nodes that we're going forward with. And, and we have introduced some policies to try and fix some of the things that, in terms of, for example, 15 communities need a mixture of uses. And while there are certain parts of North Oakville that do start to look at that, I think there's a lot of opportunity to provide that, but the choices were made either by landowners or, people developing that, no, we just want to do residential predominantly. And I think that really starts to harm that 15-minute community type feel. So I think there are things we can certainly learn. And I definitely appreciate your suggestion to go in and consult with residents in those communities who may have moved in anticipating that and haven't quite realized it yet.
Great, thank you. Glad to hear that.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through Mayor Burton. Jeff, thanks for the presentation. What is our modal split today?
I think, actually, I'm going to rely on Jill. She probably has this more ingrained in her brain than I do.
Through you, Mayor Burton, our modal split has understandably dropped a little bit due to COVID and the reduced number of trips and the reduced number of trips on transit. But through our master planning work in 2018, we were looking at a target of a 12% transit modal split, and I believe we were at about 6% at that time.
So what density do we have to get to make transit work? And what is the modal split you're aiming for that you want to get to?
Through you, Mayor Burton, the master plan had indicated a 12% transit mode split as the interim target to 2031, but that we really wanted to continue to work towards that 20% transit mode split. Beyond that, we recognized that we were a little bit behind in 2018, and there were a number of things that had to happen to help us get to that 20%. We had also indicated a 6% mode split for active transportation and 6% for transportation demand management. So overall, a 32% mode split on active modes and transit modes as the target.
So currently, right now, taxpayers subsidize the fare box for transit to what extent? Like 70%? Is that where we are?
Through you, Mayor Burton, I'd have to get back to you on that. Look to our Director of Transit to provide assistance with that one.
Okay, so yeah. So I'm just trying to figure where we get to where transit actually pays for transit. The commuters to pay for that. Do we have any, like, what are we looking at? 20, 30, 40% more people using, or like, I'm just trying to figure out where we are, where we want to get to, and how in the world we ever going to get there. Because now with the communities we are building, the transit is not there, as Councillor Palmer is saying, and people buy cars. Once people get into cars, they don't want to get out of the cars. Like they're used to them. So I'm just trying, and I know because of COVID, things have really changed. Like the parking lots at the GO train stations are basically empty now. And it's hard to believe that would ever happen after what it used to be. But I'm just trying to figure out how we get there from, and I know I've heard a lot of things, but physically, how do we do it?
Well, Councillor, you asked a core part of that, which was what's the density that it takes to support transit better. I think I'll put a little twist on your question there. I'm not aware of a transit system in the world that breaks even. And personally, I've come to believe the transit system is just part of the street. And, you know, the street is a ongoing permanent expense. And when you start thinking of transit as a feature of the street, that you're never gonna, it's never gonna be self-sustaining, just as the streets aren't. But Jeff ought to be up to date on what level of intensity in terms of persons and jobs per hectare, I think would be a good measure, is, a good level to support transit. I've heard, just to seed your answer, that in parts of Toronto where they have good use of transit in the area, 100 persons and jobs, or even 120 persons and jobs per hectare seems to be a number that works. And I would invite Mr. Abnett to enlarge on that with, the region and us. When we when we go out thinking that 65 persons and jobs per hectare is a whole bunch, it's less than those numbers. Mr. Abma, please take it away.
Sure, through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you. So I've pulled up the transit supportive guidelines from the province, and they have suggested minimum densities for various levels of transit service. So I think the type of transit service that we need to see, say on Trafalgar and Dundas, to really make those viable transit, higher order transit corridors, we're looking at the very least, very frequent bus service. So this is basically one bus every 5 minutes. In order to support that, the mayor is absolutely correct. The guidelines suggest a minimum density of 100 residents and jobs combined per hectare. If you want to get to dedicated rapid transit or bus rapid transit, like has been proposed in the regional plans and has been talked about tonight, you need 160 residents and jobs combined minimum to support that level of transit. And I think it's this level of transit that we really need to achieve to try and achieve on some of these corridors. Because I think some of the arguments have been, well, you know, if you come in at 50 residents and jobs per hectare, you're supporting transit because you're supporting what's called the basic transit service, which is one bus every 20 to 30 minutes. Well, I will say personally, it's going to take a more frequent bus than that to get me to use it more than driving my car, which may be available to me right in my driveway. Hopefully that helps. And I will just say the high end of this chart recognizes a subway level of transit at a minimum 200 people and jobs combined. And just to give you some perspective, that's the minimum that the province has required Midtown, for example, to have going forward.
Jeff, I want to thank you and the mayor, because that's really what I wanted to flesh out, because we have a small little meeting tomorrow, which has a lot to do with densities. And this really drives home the fact that, and the mayor's right, and you're right, we need 5-minute transit to make it work, and we need 100 people and jobs per hectare. The density to be about minimum 100. I thought it was 80 a few years ago, but I see it's at 100. So I thank you for that. And I think we all want to get there. Most of us anyway, and hopefully tomorrow, what we have before us based on urban expansions, there'll be a little talk about that too. So thanks everyone, appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Elgar, and I hope council will permit me to piggyback on what you said, to just emphasize this. We're not going to save a lot of farmland if we don't build transit supportive communities. And our council unanimously wants to save farmland. We've heard from hundreds and hundreds of our residents that they want us to save farmland. And some of them have been kind enough to say in their letters and emails, I know I used to show up and fight against growth and density, but now I see. So who knows, maybe we've reached a turning point as a community. It's very hard to know. I think it's hard not to know about what's in front of regional council, and still we're not getting anything except calls and messages to save farmland. Councillor Knoll, you're next, and Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Worship. Most of my points actually just got covered off between the comments from Councillor Elgar and your rebuttal on the treating transit as infrastructure, because I was going to make that point as well. But I do have a couple other ones. First of all, I do support Councillor Hazatfield's motion. I do think that public consultation, a fairly significant amount of public consultation, is critical. There's no way that the public is going to accept council imposing this on them. They're going to have to understand it and accept it and buy into it. And interestingly enough, and I think Councillor Parmar raised this when she referred to her ward and how it's turned out. I remember back in the day, and Councillor Elgar will remember this too. Actually, you will too, Mayor Burton, because you were around those tables when we were talking about OPA 198. I remember the Duwani charrettes and the higher, Councillor Adams too, the hierarchy table that we saw that Mr. Adams was showing us in terms of pedestrians first, etc. Those were almost identical tables that we saw back then, and it never worked out. And until you get the buy-in from the development industry and most importantly, the public, the buyers of the homes, the livers in the homes, the buyers of the cars, et cetera, to buy into it, it's never going to happen. So we need to make sure that we put the cart before the horse here, or the horse before the cart, or whatever the proper idiom is, and make sure that we get the public's buy-in to this. And so I think a methodical approach to getting the public on board, what is a very laudable plan, makes a lot of sense. Last thing I want to say is I moved into one of these communities. I got attracted to Oakville to move into the Oak Park community 23 years ago, I guess, 24 years ago now. And this concept was what attracted Michelle and I to really look at this. We wanted a community that was walked to and all those sorts of things. What's happened since then is that it's worked to a degree, but my neighbors drive to the local convenience store, which is 2 minutes away. And one of my number one constituent, concerns almost on a weekly basis is I don't have enough parking. And they've exceeded their 2-car garage, and they've exceeded the, whatever they've borrowed from their neighbors, et cetera. So it's going to be a public education. It's going to be a slow build, but I do support everything that was presented. I just think we need to make sure that we are bringing the public alongside first, and not just us saying, blessing this thing and just be expecting it to be accepted. So thank you very much for the presentation. Great work. Look forward to seeing how this all goes forward, and can't wait for the public consultation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Knoll. Yeah, it's important, I think, that public consultation include input and not just a tell. And it's really not Oakville's style to do public consultation where it's just a, hey, here's the news. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks again, Jeff and Jill, for the presentation. A little bit to just sort of dovetail off of Councillor Knoll's comments. There are really two ways that I see that we start getting people to get out of their car and using transit. One, if it's more efficient, meaning you can get there quicker, or it's cheaper, or two, we make it harder for people to use their cars. So I guess I'm wondering what the approach is here. We've got some people are talking about when development applications over a certain story now, you don't need to have parking provided. And that way you force people, there's no place to go, so you've got to use transit. Or are we going to start looking at dedicated lanes for transit that can move through town quicker than cars? What's the approach here that we're going to have to take? And again, I don't think it's a choice. You're right, we don't have enough roadway. But what's the approach that we're going to take? Are we going to try and figure out a way to make it more efficient for people to use public transit, or are we going to have to figure out a way to make it more difficult for people to use vehicles?
Well, I'd like to say on Jeff's behalf, his presentation was very much on the incent side and make attractive. He talked over and over again about how we've got to make people want to do it. And with that, and that is one of my basic principles of governance is you can't do stuff to people. You got to make them want what all the studies show. And in Oakville, long ago, I think we committed as a society to engage and expand and enlarge the circle of understanding to try to achieve what we need together and not as adversaries. Jeff?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. But I think you've stolen my thunder on that and in that response, and I'm perfectly fine with that. I think you're right. I think the strategy presents it as a carrot scenario rather than a stick. So it's more about what can we do to elevate and prioritize and raise the efficiency and the ease of all the alternative modes. So that I personally have lived in places where, quite frankly, I actually didn't want to have a car, right? You rent one for a weekend, you're like, well, where do I put this thing? It's so much easier just to walk, take a train, take a bus. And I think that's, it's a great goal, but it is a little bit of a lofty goal to get there from where we are today, right? I've always said Oakville is we're growing up, we're changing from a suburban community into an urban one, and we're experiencing those growing pains right now. So I feel it's, where we need to put all of our efforts right now is to make it So it's an easier choice to do with the alternative rather than to limit the, make it harder to drive. But quite frankly, we don't have to do anything, and it's going to get harder to drive because we're going to get more and more people. And if we don't change the way we're doing things or have this mindset shift or transformation, quite frankly, we're going to get congestion, and then it's going to be frustrating to take a car. So it's exactly as you say, right? So if you have dedicated bus lanes, where they're, people on the bus are going faster to where they want to go, that's an impetus to then switch that mode and get out of the car. And I don't think we have to do anything to create those sticks. It's just going to happen if we don't start to enhance these other ways of getting around.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Councillor Adams.
Thanks very much. I just wanted to ask our staff whether we can work at trying to engage with our school communities. Earlier this evening, I dropped off briefly to attend a parent council meeting at one of our local schools. And the number one issue that was being talked about was traffic congestion around pickup and drop off times around the school, because all the parents are picking up and dropping off their kids instead of walking or cycling to school. And the sense was, well, kids shouldn't walk to school because it's causing traffic congestion because the cars can't get through to the parking lot because the kids are crossing the street. So, what can we do about this? And my comment was, well, if all the kids walk to school, you wouldn't have this problem. And what can we do to get the kids to walk or cycle to school, including things like walking school buses and all these other ideas that have come up. But how can we engage with the school boards and the school communities better to create engagement centers around this issue? Because it's clearly a big problem all across town. It's not just the school that I was talking to tonight. Every single school has some element of it. And for that matter, what are the tools that we ought to be putting forward?
Yeah, there's a jurisdictional issue between us and school boards. Some of the things we'd like to tell the schools to do, we're not actually empowered to do, but you certainly raised a good point. I know that when I went to school, I always walked to school. Didn't matter the distance, didn't matter the weather. My kids went to school here through every grade and always walked, no matter the weather. It made them stronger. And I thought every parent would see the value of making your kids hardy by having them walk both ways. But anyway, I don't think for schools, I think as a municipality, we're pretty much limited to encouragement and education. Maybe we can get the parent councils to be one of the stops on the public consultation route that Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel is going to move when we get there.
Your Worship, that's what I was trying to get our staff to write down as a note is there's an opportunity to engage. So when I said engage, that wasn't me trying to say that we ought to do things for the school board, but they play a part in everything, and we play a part with them. I think what do we need to do around the schools for infrastructure and other ones?
I think you accomplished your mission. Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel, I'd like to recognize Councillor Longo so we can finish with you, and then you can move your motion. Is that okay with you? Councillor Longo.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to build on Councillor Adams' comment, one of my thoughts about school boards was actually to use the Oakville Energy Task Force, as both are members of the task force. And why not start a campaign to work with students, parents, and the school boards to encourage people to be walking, biking, running to school, whatever it may be, as one of those initiatives that actually helps the community. And I think, that would be a great forum to introduce this and have that discussion. So anyway, just a thought.
It's a great thought, and it sounds to me like you volunteered to do some work because you're on that task force. So that's the best kind of comment there is, a willing pair of hands where work is needed.
Absolutely.
With that, I think we can turn to Councillor Hazlitt-Thiel.
Thank you, Mayor Burton. And I want to thank my council colleagues because you voiced all the reasons why I feel strongly that this needs to go to public consultation. I do want to say there's a tremendous amount of insight and ideas and even recommended actions in the strategy. There's no question that there's a lot of meat here to kind of digest. I think for council, let alone for the public. And that's why I really do believe that we're better when we go out to them and consult with them, because we have really smart people who, yeah, they've learned in some areas to, this is how you get around, this is how you cope with all the things that are going on in your life, but they can tell you an awful lot about what holds them back, what would make them, buy in and be more participative. So I'm looking forward and hope that this passes tonight as we receive it, but that it is a consultation, not just a communication plan, that we really engage them in the future. And we hear that now in the last while more and more as people talk about their grandchildren and the farmlands and the other. I think we are at a time, and you said it in your report, and I think in your presentation, crossroads. So we can help people see the future, but we also need to hear from them about how we do tackle the tough decisions and what this allocation of scarce resources, well, how does that affect them? And so my motion is that we amend the staff's recommendation to include point 1, but then to refer it back to staff to conduct a public consultation on the complex and significant strategy and report back to council for further discussion prior to endorsing. And
Thank you, Councillor. Your motion is in order and it's accepted and it's on the floor. And Councillor Giddings would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to Councillor Hazlettfield. We talked about this earlier in the day, and the timing couldn't be better for it in terms of what we're going through. Mr. Mayor, you mentioned our meeting at the region tomorrow and the feedback we've had from incredible number of people across Halton. It's an exciting report. It's not very often where you finish up going through 196 pages and you're excited about what you've read and excited what you're looking forward to. And Jeff, there's a plug for you. The timing is great. The two developments we looked at tonight, we heard about concerns over traffic and pedestrian safety and the need for facilities. And we're going to have more and more of those proposals coming in front of us. So exciting times, looking forward to the public consultation, and we can go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. Okay, all right, Council, I'm going to put the vote, and I'm just going to preface that with one little piece of learning that I think is really appropriate for what we find ourselves in the middle of, not just this new strategy for mobility, but what we're doing tomorrow and looking at the region. And that is this. Darwin did not say that only the strong survive. He said only those who can adapt survive. It's your adaptability that outdoes your strength. And that's probably something we should keep in mind in all of our future planning decisions, because it looks like that's what's being asked of us as we go forward. So I'd like a recorded vote on this. And I'd like the clerk to do a roll call. You'll answer yes in support and no in opposition. Is everybody clear on that? Madam Clerk, would you please take the vote?
Councillor O'Meara?
Yes.
Councillor Robertson?
Yes.
Councillor Doddick?
Yes.
Councillor Chisholm?
Yes.
Councillor Giddings?
Yes.
Councillor Hazlettfield?
Yes.
Councillor Elgar?
Yes.
Councillor Longo?
Yes.
Counselor Noel,
Yes.
Counselor Grant,
Yes.
Counselor Adams,
Yes.
Counselor Liz Chinna. Oh,
Yes.
Counselor Palmer,
Yes.
Mayor Burton.
Yes. Council, that carries unanimously. Thank you very much for your good work on that. Now, we've saved to the end of the meeting a confidential matter, and or two confidential matters, actually. And that way, the public who won't be able to be with us for this won't be missing any of the rest of the meeting. So we need a mover for this waiving of procedure motion, that in accordance with section 2, sub 2 of our procedure bylaw, the rules of procedure established in section 5.5, sub 1, be waived to allow for an item of new business relating to labor relations to be added to the agenda this evening. Could I have a mover for that? Councillor Elgar, thank you. Is there any objection to that motion? Seeing none, I declare that carried. And now, Council, we need a mover for this motion, that Council resolve into a closed meeting session for the purpose of litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, with respect to item 8.1, the OLT appeal concerning 315 Glen Ashton Drive, and for labor relations or employee negotiations relating to an item of new business, a confidential labor relations update on the Unifor notice to strike. Is there any, Councillor Noel, thank you. Is there any objection to that motion? Madam Clerk, I see none, and so that motion carries. And Council, we need a few minutes to do the technological switch to a closed session. So I'd like to offer you a 5-minute tea break or water break or whatever you want to use it for. We're back on the air. We're out of closed session. And I'll start the end of this meeting by explaining that Council met in a closed meeting session for the purpose of litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals affecting the municipality or local board, and advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, with respect to item 8.1, OLT appeal 315 Glen Ashton Ave, and for labor relations or employee negotiations relating to an item of new business, confidential labor relations update, Unifor notice to strike. And while we were in camera, we gave a direction to staff on the OLT matter. Madam Clerk, do you want to share with the public what's shareable about that?
So the motion that was passed was that Council authorized staff to proceed in matters related to the appeal to the passing of bylaw 2021-154 in brackets 315 Glen Ashton Drive, in accordance with the recommendations of the report from the legal department dated February 8th, 2022.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Now, we need a motion to rise and report. Councillor Longo, thank you. Any objection? I see none, and that's carried. I rise and report the Committee of the Whole is met and made recommendations on consent items 4.1 and 4.2, public hearing items 6.1 and 6.2, discussion item 7.1, confidential discussion item 8.1, advisory committee minutes item 9.1, and a new business item regarding confidential labor relations update, Unifor notice to strike, as noted by the clerk. Could I have a mover and seconder for my report? Councillor Giddings and Councillor O'Meara, thank you. Any objection to the report? There being none, the report is adopted. Thank you. Could we have a mover and seconder for consideration and reading of the bylaws? Councillor Chisholm and Councillor Lischina. Thank you. Is there any objection to the motion? There being no objection, the bylaws are considered and read. And I want to thank you for the long, hard work you did tonight. It was great working with you. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Good night, everybody.